A few months ago, the civil township of Wanley, North Carolina, was officially revoked. The area's had a dwindling population for decades, and with less than a dozen people living there as of this writing, the town has been absorbed into a neighboring area. For most people, this is a footnote. No one really knew about Wanley. Hell, even the post office got confused at times. But that town used to be something, and the people who came from there are as real as it gets. I was one of those people, and I want to tell the story of what happened. In the 90s, Wanley was the home to approximately 38 people. The main export was corrugated steel roofing sheets produced by the Wanley Metalworking Roofing and Tiles. There were the 2 dairy farms, the Ansons and the Bows. We also had a small barley and wheat refinery, a high school, 2 large off-site admin offices, and one of those small-scale business incubators. Apart from that, there wasn't much to see in Wanley, just this flat chunk of land amid a big pile of nothing. In those days, people were already leaving town. Businesses were split between Fayetteville and Roseboro. A lot of people figured that there was no point making big investment plans for a town that was bleeding out. Hell, even Wanley Metalworking considered relocating south to Wilmington, abandoning their namesake. But despite all that sour gloom, it wasn't industry decisions that caused the downfall of Wanley. I was 13 years old in 1993. I grew up with my mom Ranielle and my dad Morgan. My little brother Amos had the room right across the hall. He was just 10 years old at the time. It was the last month of middle school. The following autumn, I was supposed to study at Wanley High, but for all of primary school, we had to take a bus out of town. Took us about 25 minutes, one way. Not too bad, but it singled us out. Us Wanley kids were a unit at that point, arriving and leaving in unison. It was a Friday afternoon in late May. I was on the school bus, on my way back home. There were these 2 kids in front of me who couldn't stop talking about their latest Super Nintendo game. Star Fox, I think. I'd zoned out their entire conversation, instead opting to stare out the window. When we got to the Wanley town sign, I noticed something strange. There was a man from the sheriff's office using a roller to add something to the sign. All I saw was the word no. There were several police vehicles blocking the road into town. I recognized the faces of the officers, but I hadn't talked to them before. There weren't a lot of criminals in Wanley, and my family were all on the straight and narrow. Even my dad, who joked about being a bank robber, he wasn't. He was a corporate lawyer. The bus stopped, and so did the conversation. No more Star Fox. The double doors at the front of the bus whooshed open, and an older policeman stepped on board with his hands on his walkie-talkie. He looked at the driver and nodded, then turned to us. "Hey there, kids," he said. "I'm Officer Jellin. We're not going to keep you here too long. We just need to have a little talk, if that's okay." "Is that okay, kids?" There was a muttering yes coming from the Wanley Middle School children, myself included. Officer Jellin nodded, hiding a wide smile under a wild mustache. "All right, I'll be right back. Sir, would you accompany me outside for a sec?" The driver stepped outside with Officer Jellin. Meanwhile, the rest of us kept looking around, trying to see what was wrong. "Maybe there's an accident," said one of the younger kids. "Maybe someone got hurt." "I think there's a fire," said another. "Mom says we can't barbecue because of fire hazard." "Maybe there's a murderer," said the Star Fox kid. "And they found like heads and stuff." "Gross," I added. "You're gross." I looked back outside as the other kids started to squabble. It went from fire to accident to murderers to space aliens, then right back to talking Star Fox. Meanwhile, I stared off in the distance, and that, in turn, gave me an idea. I could see the back of the town sign from the rear window. I leaned back and looked out. The sign read, "You're now leaving Wanley," but there was a large white text added to it, "No milk." Before I got the chance to tell the other kids, Officer Jellin came back on board. The driver got back in his seat. "I had a very productive talk with Mr. Hurley here, and he tells me that I've stumbled upon a particularly crafty and well-behaved group of students. Is he right about that? Is that what you are?" Of course we were. In unison, we agreed with Officer Jellin. "Well, in that case, you might be able to help me out. See, we're looking for a special something that we can't bring into town, or people might get sick. And we wouldn't want anyone to get sick now, would we? Of course not. Then I hope you won't mind some of my officers checking your backpacks to make sure nothing bad snuck along, would you?" 2 officers stepped on board as Jelen hurried outside to halt an approaching sedan. Someone was trying to get out of town, but was turned away. One by one, the officers had a short talk with us and went through our backpacks, our lunches. Specifically, when they got to the Star Fox kid, just ahead of me, I heard them asking him a series of questions. What he'd been eating, how long ago, if he'd gone to the bathroom since. Strange questions. Turns out he had chocolate milk as part of his lunch. The officer who asked clicked his walkie-talkie twice, some sort of discreet signal. When they got to me, I handed them my backpack. Have you had anything to drink today? He asked. My mom made lemonade, I said. That sounds great. Wish my mom made me some. He smiled. Anything to eat? Any cheese? Any milk? Just fish sticks and rice, I said. And ketchup. Doesn't sound too bad. He rummaged through the backpack and seemed relieved not to find what he was looking for. Alright, looks like we're done. You have a good weekend now. You too. Once they'd gone through every backpack, they circled back to the Star Fox kid. They asked him to come along and said they had to ask a couple more questions. It was scary. He started crying, and they tried to encourage him every step of the way. They said they were gonna call his parents, and everything was gonna be fine. I wasn't so sure. Once the bus started rolling, I looked back to see Officer Jelen in the rear window. He wasn't smiling anymore. He had this grim look on his face, staring straight into the asphalt, motionless. There was a long line of cars being turned away. Some cars I recognized, friend, and neighbors looking to make a quick exit. The bus had to pull to the side at one point to let a fire truck pass. I got the impression that something big had happened, but no one was telling me what it was. The conversation had died down, and I had to fill the silence with my worries. There was no chatter to distract me. By the time we got to the bus stop, I saw all our parents lined up, my mom and dad included. Amos was also there. He'd taken an earlier bus and had been home since lunch. As I stepped off, my dad swept me up in his arms. Mom was crying. What did they do? Dad asked. Did they take anything? What did they ask you? Mom took me from him. Give it a rest, Morgan, she spat. Let's go home. Amos seemed disinterested, instead clutching a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic that they'd bribed him with. There was a man in camouflage with an assault rifle walking up and down the street, asking people to disperse and return to their homes. Mom and Dad hurried back to the car, sticking me and Amos in the back. He went straight to reading his comic book, but I kept looking out the window. As we got back on the road, heading home, I noticed several strange signs. The most prominent one was on the window of a corner shop. No milk, by order of the National Guard. When we took the road by the Bowes Dairy Farm, I heard popping noises. Before I got the chance to ask, my dad intervened. They're celebrating, he said. It's just fireworks. We lived at the end of a street, next to a roundabout. We had 3 neighboring houses. 2 of them were elderly couples who rarely left their homes, and the last was another family with a teenage boy. We'd hung out a bit before he started high school, but we'd fallen out of touch in the last year or so. Still, I had fond memories of watching movies on their big screen TV and playing video games. I bet they had the new Star Fox game. As we turned the corner, the street was in chaos. The Masons were out on the lawn, arguing with 2 fire marshals. The other elderly couple, the Stephensons, were dragging bags to their car. The other family was nowhere to be seen, and their SUV wasn't in the driveway. Their front door was half open and the lock broken. There was a piece of white paper with red text nailed to the side of the door. Just go to your rooms, Dad said. We'll talk over dinner. But what's going on? I asked. We'll talk about it later, he insisted. For now, I need you to stay in your rooms. Amos looked up from his comic book. Can I play Nintendo? As long as you want, honey, Mom smiled. And tonight, there's no bedtime. Amos looked up at me like we were going to Disneyland. It took him a moment to realize that he was the only one smiling, and he didn't understand why. To be fair, neither did I. We hurried inside. Amos and I ran upstairs and got to our rooms. Amos had been allowed to keep the Super Nintendo in his room, while I had a VCR. It was fair enough. He could play games, and I could watch movies, but I wasn't in a mood to watch anything. I had this sinking feeling that something was terribly wrong, and I kept looking out the window, hoping to see something. The Stephensons were arguing next to their car, and the Masons were being ushered back into their house. I could see smokestacks rising from the dairy farms and flashing lights from fire trucks going back and forth down Main Street. Every now and then, if I listened closely, I could hear popping noises. It didn't sound like fireworks. It sounded like gunshots. I'd only been in my room for a couple of minutes before I heard a careful tapping at the door. Amos stepped in with this haunted look on his face, his eyes wide and unblinking. "Can you help me with my science project?" he asked. "It's acting funny." Amos had been working on a science project for school. It wasn't a big deal. He'd taken different kinds of milk and placed them in cups to see which ones went bad first. He usually checked it before he went to bed, making notes about changes over time. "Can you please look?" he asked. "It's really weird." "All right." For something to make Amos say please, it had to be something out of the ordinary. I walked across the hall to his room, catching a whiff of an argument downstairs. Mom had raised her voice. There was a certain pitch to it when she was worried about something, and she wasn't holding back this time. Made me feel sorry for Dad. Half the time it wasn't even him she was angry at. I followed Amos past the pause screen for Contra 3 and up to the window. He had the cups resting on a small metal tray with plastic wrapping. He stopped just ahead of it. I heard this noise, and he pointed at the cups, clutching his notebook. "I haven't opened it. Mom says it smells too much." As I approached, I saw the cups rattle. Not much, but enough to make a noise. I could see the plastic wrap shaking. Looking into the cups, it took me a while to understand what I was looking at. At first I thought it was maggots, but it wasn't. It looked like something had coalesced at the bottom of each cup, and there were these tiny white strands shooting out of it, prodding the plastic for weaknesses. It sort of looked like an egg, in a way, with these inches-long strands that moved independently of one another, all of it milky white. "It keeps moving," he said. "Look." He stepped up to it and put his finger on top of the plastic. The strands in the cup immediately reacted, shooting straight up. It looked almost electric in a way. "Why does it do that?" he asked. "Don't touch it," I said. "We gotta put it away." "Should we tell Mom?" I could hear them arguing downstairs and shook my head. "We should throw it away," I said. "Let's flush it." Amos protested all the way to the bathroom, but didn't want to make a fuss. I told him I'd take the blame and he could go back to playing Contra. That seemed to do the trick. I placed the tray on the floor next to the toilet. I put on Mom's plastic cleaning gloves, just in case. As I took off the plastic wrap, those little white strands shot out of the cup, aiming straight at my face. They were a lot longer than I'd suspected, just inches away from my face. I panicked and dropped the entire cups down the toilet with a squeal. Looking down, they squirmed and twisted back and forth, these white strands whipping back and forth like worms in agony. They were so much longer than I'd anticipated, and I could feel them prodding against the plastic gloves. They were looking for the warmth of my skin. The tips were much sharper than anticipated and almost poked a hole in my gloves. I flushed. After waiting a few seconds, I could still see some strands moving at the bottom of the bowl. I flushed again and again and again. Finally, when there was nothing left, I dumped half a bottle of toilet cleaner in, flushed again, and then waited. I must have sat there for 10 minutes, just watching the water. There was this tingle in my spine, like I'd escaped some great danger, the same kind of rush you'd get if you'd nearly stepped on a snake or seen a bear. I went back to my room and brought out a notebook. "No milk," I wrote at the top. I tried to name all the places in town where there might be a lot of milk or milk-based products. The dairy farms were obvious, but there was also the high school cafeteria, the corner shop with the soft serve machine, and the convenience store. Since this was a town with several dairy farms, milk and cheese was sort of everywhere. I listed at least 24 locations where there might be a lot of dairy products. There was a loud banging on the front door downstairs. Amos and I rushed out of our rooms to see what was going on. From upstairs, I saw Dad open the door to a man in military uniform. Mom looked up the stairs. "Get back to your rooms," she said. "We'll tell you when you can come out." "All right." "Mom, what's going on?" "Just play your games," she said. "Wait there." "But Mom, rooms," she yelled. Now, she wasn't messing around. Amos and I looked at one another and silently decided to stick together on this one. There was a discussion between my parents and the man at the door, Amos, and I retreated back to my room. He tried reading, but he kept getting distracted. You think it's bad? He asked, putting down his comic book. Amos had always been a bit of a pain, lots of pranks and scares, but this time was different. We weren't playing around. It was like a silent agreement. Yeah, I said, I think so. Why? What's so bad? I think there's something wrong with the milk. But you flushed it, right? Not just that milk, I said. All of it. All milk in town. It's all gone bad. Worse, I said. Like, real bad. What happened next was quick. I heard someone coming up the stairs, and in the next moment, my parents opened the door to my room. They asked us to remain calm. They asked us to be quiet. They asked us to come along, stay close, and don't ask any questions. On our way out, I saw the man in uniform stepping into our upstairs bathroom. Seconds later, he sprinted back out, yelling into his walkie-talkie. Mom and Dad hurried us downstairs. 3 other men rushed past us, up the stairs, dragging dirt and mud through the living room carpet on their way up. All in uniform, all armed with assault rifles. They left the front door open, and I could see at least 6 more people waiting outside. We got in our car, taking nothing with us except Amos's comic book. A man tapped the driver's seat window with his rifle, and my dad took off down the road. We can't get out of town, Mom said, keeping her voice low. Morgan, they're testing women at the checkpoints. Maybe it's for the better, Dad said. Who knows how this can affect you? You might need a vaccine. You've seen what they did with the dairy cows. They take them out back, and then, we are not cattle, Raniel. They're not putting people, Ronnie, out to pasture. Then where the hell are the goddamn Abernathys? Mom roared back. Them being dragged off was just for fun, for show. We're not having this discussion, Dad said. Not in front of the kids. I'm almost in the 2nd trimester, she whispered. And God knows what they'll do if they... Mom quieted down, holding a hand to her mouth. Dad looked at her with a mix of pity and frustration. I feel strange, Morgan, she continued. And it's not like last time. There's this big 4-way intersection in the middle of the downtown area. When we got to that point, the lights had turned red. There were these military trucks going by, one by one, at least a dozen, covered in blue plastic tarps. Long after the lights turned green, the trucks were still going by. As the second to last truck was going by, there was this loud metal bang, and the entire truck started leaning. For a moment, we all thought it was going to tip over. 2 of the wheels were off the ground. It tipped back down, and the driver leaned on the horn. From seemingly every corner of the street, armed men started shouting at us to move. I could see something moving under the tarp, something sharp, poking and prodding against the plastic. I'd seen it before. Dad stepped on the gas, going the other way. I saw the high school gymnasium. In the distance, lined with vehicles all along the street. They told us to stay here, Dad said. Let's just hunker down and wait. We'll be trapped. We can leave at any time. We can't go by foot. I don't like the look of those rifles. You know they wouldn't. They exchanged a glance, and the conversation stopped. Amos and I just kept our heads down. There were still popping sounds outside. They were closer now. Dad found a spot further down the street, and we made our way to the gymnasium. There were at least 100 people gathered outside. I picked up a few things from various discussions going around. For example, the armed men were from the National Guard. Most of them had shown up early that morning, probably minutes after I'd left for school. There was a lot of talk from a lot of people. A soldier explaining something about lactic acid, bacteria, to one of our science teachers. An old man complaining about how they took his freezer. A kid being scolded for not telling his mom he had a milkshake with his lunch. A farmhand looking distraught, saying something about the new cow feed used at the Anson farm and how it was unfair for the bows to get shut down. Bits and pieces of 100 different stories. But what struck me the most was a group of young women looking distraught. One of them kept repeating the same thing over and over to a soldier. I'll never get rid of it, she asked. It's in there, for good. We had to sign our names on the way in. Dad signed for the 4 of us. I barely recognized anyone. They'd set up green military cots, 2 by 2, with a basic footlocker for valuables and personal belongings. Dad weaved between aisles of cots, keeping me and Amos close. Mom was looking for the restroom. When can we go back to the house? Amos asked. They're checking the pipes, Dad said. That can take a while. Checking the pipes for what? I dunno, but whatever it is, they're making sure we're okay. A stone sunk into my stomach. Maybe what I'd flushed down the toilet had gotten stuck in the pipes. Somehow, maybe that's what they saw. For the next few hours, we stayed put. They handed out a couple of basic dairy-free meals. Once every 2 hours, there were a couple of soldiers walking down the aisles, making sure everyone looked okay. The people were far from okay. I saw this one athletic guy shaking like a leaf, coughing into his hand over and over. It sounded awful, like his body was trying to push something out. When the patrol made their rounds, they took him outside. I didn't see him again. Mom was in the bathroom for a long time, at least an hour. When she got back, she had this slightly ashen complexion, like she hadn't slept for days. Dad was worried, but she kept telling him she was okay. Once it started to get dark, the patrols said they were closing down for the night. A curfew was in effect. Dad had all kinds of questions, but didn't want to start arguing with armed soldiers. I could tell he was holding back. Corporate lawyer. Or no, personal freedoms are a big sticking point to him. I remember this big clock over the scoreboard. If you managed to filter out the cries and the occasional scream, that clock was the only thing you could hear. And I could swear that the seconds were getting longer the more you listened to it. Mom and Dad shared a cot, while Amos and I got one each. Amos went out like a light, but I stayed up long after midnight. I couldn't help it. That damn clock kept me up. With the lights off, all I saw was the sharp shadows cast by the crescent moon creeping in through the cloud cover. As the screams and cries turned to sniffles and snores, I was left awake staring into the ceiling. I heard people whispering about megabacteria, something in the methane, the lactic acid, the gas lines. Nobody knew for sure. There was one guy who kept muttering about birds being the source, claiming it had rained feathers moments before stuff hit the fan. There was this one drunk man by the exit who kept talking out loud to himself. They danced like skinny little worms, reaching for the stars. Skinny little worms, just like I'd seen in my brother's science project. I'd been drifting in and out of sleep for 1 or 2 hours. When I snapped to attention, I heard someone running past me and looked up to see Mom's side of the cot empty. Dad sat up, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. "Ronnie," he whispered. He noticed me looking his way. "You see where Mom went?" I shook my head. He got up and took me by the hand. "Let's go look." We went down the aisles, hand in hand. It was eerie watching all these strangers sleeping around us like nothing was going on. Even the drunk guy by the exit was out cold by now. I don't know if I was imagining things, but I had the mental image of those skinny little worms appearing. Sometimes when I looked at the sleeping people, I imagined little shadows scurrying to hide, something crawling out of a nose, an ear, a mouth. We walked past this one man who looked sick, who had a metal bucket next to his cot. I could hear little tapping movements at the bottom of it, as if something was struggling to reach out. "She might be in the bathroom," Dad said. "Let's go look." There were 2 patrolmen by the bleachers, smoking and telling stories. They kept passing a bottle back and forth. Dad kept his head down, making sure not to look them in the eye. We went through a short hallway and made it to the bathrooms. The power was still on, but all the lights were off, making the emergency exit sign the only thing to guide us. Dad was about to step inside the bathroom when I tugged on his sleeve. "That's for ladies, Dad," I said. "I'm sure they won't mind." We stepped through the door. Moonlight was coming in from a frosted glass window, casting an eerie shadow across the floor. We split up and started knocking on the stalls. It was quiet. Dad had this worried look on his face. "Maybe you should step outside for this," he said. "Just for a while." "Let's check," I said. "It'll be quick." "Wait, let's." I opened one of the stalls. I barely saw anything. In the moonlight, I couldn't see much more than outlines. I saw a pair of still hands holding up a bloated belly with these dancing little worms pushing their way out of the skin, like a goddamn human garlic press. The tapping sound of 100 thin parasites looking for a new host. Some were just an inch long, others were as tall as an arm. One of them poked the nail on my thumb, but couldn't latch on. I saw chunks of hair strewn across the floor, a side effect of late-stage infection. A hand fell over my eyes, and I was dragged outside. When I looked up, I saw Dad. His entire body language had changed, like he was in pain. For a few seconds, all he did was stare at me. Then there was a bang on the door, coming from the inside. "I need you to get your brother," he said. "I need you to get your brother, and I need you to get to the car." "But Dad, what?" "Here." He handed me the car keys. "I'm trusting you, and I need you to hurry." "But what about?" Another bang on the door. Dad straightened his back and pushed it shut. I stepped back, feeling my pulse rise through my chest. "Dow," he yelled. "I'll meet you outside." Running back out, some of the cloud cover had cleared outside. I started running down the aisles, trying to find my way back to Amos. It was difficult. Everything looked different in the dark. There was this woman who got out of her cot just a few feet ahead of me. She coughed, and this avalanche of worms trickled out of her mouth. They spilled onto her chest and scattered across the floor. She turned to me, chunks of hair coming off her scalp. She wheezed at me, her brown eyes tired from crying. She tried to say something, to call for help, but all I heard was that inhuman wheezing as little white worms made their way across her chest. I don't know if I was the one who started it, but someone did. That first scream, that choir of screams, as lives came crashing down. There were so many parasites, so many victims, some who just felt funny and tried to sleep it off, waking to a nightmare. Others had tried keeping their sickness a secret. There were no patterns, no limits. Everyone was susceptible, young, old, strong, frail. There were some with parasites coming out their stomachs, others through the ears, mouth, and nose. There was this one man who had them in his left eye. As they reached out to others for help, the parasites spilled from one person to the next, burrowing into their skin. I didn't find Amos, he found me. He kept telling me that a bad man had taken his comic book and that he ran away looking for Dad and help. He asked 100 questions at once, but I just grabbed him and ran, clutching the car keys so hard that my hand cramped. We made our way to the exit, but there was a rush of people going in and out like a waterfall. Someone yelled, telling people to drop to the floor. 10 others screamed back, begging for help. Others just screeched like wounded animals, trying to alert the flock of incoming danger. Amos ducked to the floor, and I followed him. Then the gunshots started. We got out by crawling on all fours. One of the soldiers tripped over me, accidentally kicking me across the ribs. When we got outside, we stuck to the wall and kept a low profile. Amos couldn't stop crying, but I just pulled him along. I could barely hear anything over my ringing ears and pounding pulse as gunshot after gunshot rang out behind us. We crawled our way through the flower beds, using the high school's blue sunflowers as a cover. Most people were stuck inside. Some made their way out, filtering back into the military tents outside. Amos and I made our way back to the car. My fingers barely worked as I fumbled to open the door. When I finally did, I could see more people heading our way from down the road. I got the car open and pushed Amos into the back seat. I followed him, locking the doors from the inside. We curled into the leg space between the back and front seat, hugging each other tight as I hushed him. He couldn't stop crying. He had so many questions piling up that they were overflowing into a jumbled mess. Questions about Mom, about Dad, about the people outside, about the bad man who took his comic book. As the gunfire died down, people started pouring out, but they weren't just people anymore. One of them noticed our car. One of them spotted us inside. And after that first one came another, and then another. In less than half an hour, there were so many of them they were blocking all the windows. All I saw were silhouettes, and all I heard were wheezing noises. Bodies calling for help, begging, pressing themselves against the windows to get at us. Rattling coughs, over and over, as something inhuman settled in their throats. I could only see parts of them, as they banged on our windows. There was this one man smiling at me with little worms dancing between the gaps in his yellow teeth. He pressed himself against the passenger window, meeting my gaze. "That man," he groaned. "That man, help." An eternity passed in the back of that car, and sometime during that eternity, the noises stopped. Maybe they moved on, maybe they got shot. I don't know, but at some point, the sun broke through and we were both okay. Panicked, but okay. There were soldiers outside, rounding up people from the gymnasium and people from the tents. Some were sent back home after signing some documents. Others were asked to stay near their vehicles until further notice. And me, well, I refused to open the door for anyone, Amos, and I stayed in there for hours until we could feel the heat baking us. Then the door opened. My dad had a spare set of keys. Seeing his familiar face outside the passenger side window was everything I needed to know that, in some way, we'd be okay. He'd locked himself in one of the stalls and kept quiet all night. Looking back at it, he and everyone else were forced to sign some kind of agreement. They were given a hefty compensation, and all we could say was that it was killer bacteria coming from one of the dairy farms, which, in a sense, was true, but it didn't tell the whole truth. It took Dad years to build up the courage to tell me what really happened to Mom. 6 years, I think. Apparently, she was pregnant, but the whole thing had been a bit touch and go. They didn't want to tell us until they were sure. She was just at the point where her body had started lactating, and milk protein just, I don't know. I can't shake the feeling that maybe it was her that I saw in that stall. Dad took the money and left town. He and so many others. Some moved in, encouraged by the sudden price drop. I guess that's how the town made it all the way to 2023. 176 people died in total, directly or indirectly. But what they don't tell you is that thousands were permanently scarred. Some of the girls who'd just entered puberty had to get sterilized, or they might risk another outbreak years down the line. They did some tests on me as well, but determined I was fine. Amos too. Eyes are affected differently. I still have that bacteria in me, in some capacity. While I can eat and drink dairy nowadays, there is that part of me that just can't bring myself to try. The thought of reliving any part of that day gives me this sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach. I feel my pulse rising just thinking about it. Seeing that white liquid fills me with the sense that there is so much moving around in it that I just can't see. If it hadn't been for what happened that day in 1993, I think Wanley would have been fine. But as it stands, I'm glad it's finally gone. I just finished my first week of what's meant to be an 8-week cycle. I would leave right now if I could just take off through the trees and hope for the best, but I can't, not without Alabama. She's my border collie, a rust-colored ball of energy named not after the state, but Patricia Arquette's character in True Romance. And now she's gone and I'm all alone in the tower in the woods. But no, I'm not alone. Those things are out there. So here we are. The final words of a failed screenwriter, Mike Bradbury, 26, of sound mind and body. I don't know where to start. It's confusing, overwrought. Some might say I could tell you about him, the man who hired me, but he's in lockdown, no contact for 8 weeks. So what good would that do? I won't start with the survival guide I found in the tower either. We'll get to that in due time, I promise, but not yet. I don't want to confuse you. Confusing you will only make things harder, so I'll start with the most unconfusing thread in this impossible tale, the beginning. It started 2 months ago with Craigslist, the home of locked iPads, strange sexual encounters, serial killers, and human traffickers. I'd read enough creepypastas to know better than to go job hunting online. But then again, I was penniless, living at home, and desperate as all hell. 6 months prior, I had fled west with Hollywood in my eyes, and dreams of becoming a screenwriter in my head. I had survived all of 3 months before my lack of employment forced me home with my tail between my legs. Home, Roanoke, Virginia, where dreams go to die. Mom and Dad were overjoyed when I asked if I could stay with them for a while. They hadn't wanted me to go west in the first place. That was the most crushing of all, hauling my luggage upstairs and settling back into the old life I was supposed to have left behind. It's not their fault I'm here, that's important to know. I didn't need to get a job. They weren't asking for rent and telling me to get paid or get out. They welcomed me with open arms, the best parents in the world. But my ego was wounded. I was a bona fide failure, the one who couldn't crush it in the big city, and the last thing I wanted to be, even more than a failure, was an unemployed 26-year-old living with mommy and daddy. So I went around to local businesses with my credentials, pitching myself like a door-to-door salesman flogging his wares. Unfortunately for the businesses of Roanoke, Virginia, they weren't buying my brand of BS. 3 weeks of that, and I found myself, surprise, surprise, an unemployed 26-year-old still living with mommy and daddy. I tried to reconnect with some of my old friends, but all of them had moved away and started their lives. I had officially become that guy who never left his hometown. Then, like a kiss from God, I stumbled over the bizarre ad, the one that read, simply and strangely, seeking a partner for rapture. The one will be compensated handsomely. Rapture, a feeling of intense pleasure or joy. Despite that, I figured it was meant in the biblical sense. Not a sex thing, and I doubted if some Craigslist deviant would include quoted scripture and pictures of God's disciples in his online posting. Sure, there were plenty of red flags. Oh, say, the endless quotes about God smiting down the sodomites and the sinners and the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh. I didn't see any of it. Hell, the fine print could have read seeking the organ between your legs for consumption, and I would have glossed right over it. The only words I saw were compensated handsomely. After a brief internal debate, I called the number at the bottom of the ad. It rang twice. "Hello," answered a voice that was deep and stuffy, like the man on the other end had just been torn from sleep. I was silent. I hadn't thought about what I might say if anyone picked up. I cleared my throat. "Yeah, hi, my name is Mike. I'm calling for," I realized I didn't know his name. There hadn't been one on the ad. "I'm calling about the online ad." The man on the phone brightened. Yes, of course. Are you interested in the position?" Well, I wasn't sure. What exactly is the position? There wasn't much information on the post. He chuckled. "Right, I'm sure you're awfully confused. But, as I hope you'll understand, I prefer not to discuss these things over invisible air. I know it's terribly secretive, but I assure you everything is quite kosher." He sounded scholarly, intelligent, not at all like the fervent Jesus freak I'd been expecting. The word erudite sprang to mind. He sounded sane. I felt my shoulders relax as he continued. "Do you know where Eagle Rock is?" he asked. "Thereabouts, off Route 20, is a little diner. Dreadful eggs, but the pie isn't exactly a sin against pastries. How about you and I meet there for lunch, say 1 o'clock tomorrow? I'll tell you all about the position, and if it isn't to your liking, I'll cover your gas and throw in, how about $100 for your troubles?" The word yes tickled at my lips, scraping to get out. The whole arrangement sounded good, maybe too good. But then again, what was the harm? I hesitated and blew out my reply in a burst of air. "Yes," I said, 1 o'clock works. "Splendid. I forgot to ask, what's your—" The line had gone dead. "Name," I finished with no one to answer. Duty's Diner was, what a writer more eloquent than I might call, in the middle of nowhere. It was a chrome dining car, skin flaked, sign rusty, sitting in the back of a wide, asphalt lot. It sat just off the highway, framed by a wall of trees, its lot mostly empty, spare a few long haul trucks and scattered pickups. Confederate flag bumper stickers were abundant. I rolled my eyes and checked my watch. 15 minutes to 1:14 by the time I stepped into Duty's and was met with the smell of grease and the lovely jukebox tunes of bygone eras. It was a dive. Soap windows, strange taxidermy critters garnishing the walls, sunburned ass cracks smiling at me from stools lining the counter, a few elderly waitresses who looked like anti-smoking public service announcements dashed around, refilling coffee cups, jotting down orders. I scanned the booths, looking for one to claim. That's when I saw him, the man I was here to meet, tucked into the back corner. I don't know how I knew it was him, I just did. His height struck me first. I could tell he was tall, skeletal, even though he was seated. The next thing I noticed were his clothes. He wore some kind of grease-stained jumper, something you might see on the back of a malnourished smelter in photos of the Soviet reign, or on Michael Myers, and he was watching me. I looked away like a child caught staring, and pretended to scan the specials. Even still, I could feel his eyes crawling over my skin, watching me like two bright animals over the rim of his newspaper. They were serving tasty good cherry pie, I noted with no real interest. "You must be Mike," said a voice, the words laced through with a slight English accent that had been lost over the phone. I looked up. Kent Aberdeen, the man who would be my employer, towered over me. He was older than I'd initially thought, late 50s, early 60s, face bracketed in deep lines, hair salted and thinning. He smiled. It lit up his face like a Klieg spotlight. "Please join me." I ordered us coffee and pie. "I hope you don't mind." My voice wouldn't come at first. "That's fine," I said finally. We spoke for the better part of an hour. He told me about the small fortune he'd made trading futures overseas, about how he'd come to America when he'd gotten a sign about the coming end. He said my job would be simple. I'd be living in the tower for 8 weeks, and that was all I had to do. He didn't seem crazy. He made it all sound so rational, logical, rooted in reality. Of course it was ridiculous, the ramblings of an unstable mind, but when he told me the insane amount I'd be getting paid, I was willing to deal with a little crazy. Plus, as he was quick to point out, there would be power so I'd have access to my devices. If I brought my own Wi-Fi router, I don't understand, I asked finally. What do you need me for? He smiled. I hardly venture out. I'm a bit of a recluse, if you believe it. He chuckled at his own expense. I want someone I can trust, watching over me. It makes me feel safe. You're not the first person I've hired, nor would you be the last. 8 weeks is all I ask, and if thereafter you find yourself willing to continue, that can be discussed. He wasn't telling me something. I knew that for certain, but I brushed it off, blinded by the dollar amount, and it didn't sound so bad. A dose of nature with my dog by my side. Assuming, he allowed the dog. Are you a religious man, Michael? He asked. I was as secular as they come, which I think showed on my face because it split into a wide smile. Neither am I, he said, but the listing. Ah, yes, the online advertisement. I figure if someone's not turned away by that schlock, they must be serious. So, he said, tenting his fingers, are you serious? I won't be offended if you decide to decline the position. I understand it's unorthodox. I finished my coffee and looked at him. One thing, I said, I have a dog. His smile cut me off. It was wide, toothy, full of good cheer. I love dogs, he said. I don't need to tell you what my answer ended up being. I met him at duties the next day with my suitcase in hand and my affairs in order. Alabama accepted approximately 600 head scratches from Kent before we set out in his pickup. Alabama between my feet, my suitcase in the bed. We drove through scroll of access roads, dense woods blurring by. As we drew deeper into the wilderness, he asked if I wouldn't mind putting on a blindfold. People pleaser as always. I did. I figured if he tried anything, Alabama would tear his throat out. Was the blindfold laced in something? I'll never know. However, soon after it graced my eyes, I crashed into a deep, restless sleep. Alabama was licking my face. Her leash was roped around my ankle, and where the screw was I. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the trees as I grimaced and looked around. Wood snarled in around a thin clearing from which a repurposed fire watchtower grew like a wooden fist. It was a single-room cabin elevated high above the tree line by a network of stilts. A staircase tied it together, circling the infrastructure as it spiraled up to the cap. The bottom was fenced in, and beneath it, beside a growling generator and humming septic tank, was a reinforced bunker door planted firmly into the forest floor. Christ, I muttered. Alabama nosed at my hand, and I stroked her absently as I saw there was no pickup truck and no Kent Aberdeen. There was nowhere to go but up. All right, I sighed. Come on. I grabbed my suitcase, the massive bag of kibble, and, with Alabama leading the way, mounted the stairs and trudged up the countless creaky steps that led to my new digs. The cabin was wide and Spartan, its walls wrapped in windows which splashed buckets of sunlight over a bed, a desk, a toilet, a fridge, and a shelf fitted with enough canned goods to survive the apocalypse. I kicked off my shoes and collapsed on the bed. It wasn't exactly memory foam, but it would do just fine. Alabama jumped up beside me and curled up into a panting ball of ready fur. Yeah, I said, it's not much, I know, but I felt something hard and square dig into my leg from beneath the blankets. I rooted around and came up with a battered composition notebook. Okay, I said, turning it over in my hands. It was frayed, its binding abused. I carefully peeled back the cover and read, first with confusion, then mounting dread, what waited for me inside. There were no names, no dates, merely a strange list scrawled in different hands, as if compiled by multiple people. It reads as follows. This is not a joke. If you're reading this, it means he's gone and you're alone. This list is incomplete. I doubt very much if it will ever be complete. There are things out there we might never know about, for good reason. Your job is to add to this list, if at all possible. Your job is to survive the night. Godspeed. When if you see a hiker, kill him before he kills you. He is an imitator. He is not human. He wants your flesh for a new husk. If you get his blood on you, wash it off immediately. 2. If you see something peering through the tower windows at night, ignore it. It will go away. If you meet its gaze, it will take that as an invitation. then you're in serious trouble. 3. Beware the wicked ones. I've only seen them once. I'm not sure what purpose they serve. They haven't bothered me. 4. Violently scribbled out. 5. Something screams through the woods on most nights, always past 3 a.m. Not sure what it belongs to, what it wants. 6. Avoid the tree talker at all costs. It's long, gangly, bark-like, changes shapes, and moves like vines. Carry the megaphone at all times, and if you see one, key the microphone next to speaker. High frequency will drive it off. 7. Something brings gifts, unsure what it is. Found mangled animals, bloody scraps of fur at the tree line. Will update later. 8. An illegible smudge, like it had been erased. The list ended abruptly. 6. Rules to survive the night. I reread the words in the notebook again and again, hoping I'd miss some indication of this clearly sick joke. But no joke, no gimmick, just 6 rules. By the time the severity of the list had settled into my gut in a ball of dread, the evening red of the west had doused my world in shadow. It would soon be nightfall. I couldn't sleep the first night. I tossed and turned and reread the notebook and tried to convince myself it was a prank, an awful, mean prank, but I knew deep down it wasn't. Alabama groaned and whined and told me to get to bed, but I couldn't. I kept the lights on for a while, but that just turned the world beyond the windows black, like I was in a dark chasm where horrible things slithered and writhed. Finally, I killed the lights. I sat there in the darkness for a while. Your job is to survive the night. An eternity later, I fell asleep. I woke to the high, anxious whine buried deep in my dog's throat. "What is it, girl?" I groaned as I sat up. It was still dark out, darker than before. A dead night, one where no moon nor her galaxy of suitors dare emerge. Then I heard it, on the window just behind me. Tap, tap, tap. I slowly turned. My neck prickled with dread. My stomach curled with nausea. I looked out into the night, and something looked back. I gasped and yanked the blanket up over my eyes. It was almost comedic, a child spooked by the noise in his closet. I grabbed my dog and stuffed her under the covers. I sat there for a moment, listening to my ragged breath slowly inflating and deflating the blanket shield, and the quiet growl brewing in Alabama's throat. I thought about it, the impossible it, the thing, bony and dreadful, looking in at me, its head as big as the cabin, its eyes as big as doors, pale and milky and full of dumb hunger. I could feel it, like its presence was a malignancy, radiating caustic heat through the walls. I knew it was watching me with sick knowledge, waiting for me to let it in. Tap, 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 the sound of a long, knife-like fingernail scraping glass. Alabama yelped. I pressed her tight against my chest as a dull ache settled into my teeth, as my stomach knotted up. Tap, tap, tap. I held my breath, afraid that if it heard me breathe, its massive hand, made of stiff bones and dead skin, would crash through the roof and steal me off into the night. Tap, tap, tap. I waited and waited and waited, and silence. I listened, breath bated, heart pumping a hot rush of blood and adrenaline through my veins. I sat that way, blanket wrapped over my head, Alabama pressed to my chest, until sunlight stole the darkness and daylight banished all things that went tap. At first light, I marched down the stairs and pounded on the bunker door until my fist was bloody and my voice was raw. Ted Aberdeen, if he heard me, did not reply. Noon came and went as I banged and screamed and told him I wanted to go. I wasn't in a rational state of mind. I could have set out on my own, taken off through the trees, with my dog leading the way, but I was blinded by images of it. That day was a blur of hysterics and hardly warded off exhaustion. I hadn't slept and it was taking its toll. I was cracking. I don't remember falling asleep, but it must have been early evening when my body had just powered off. When I woke up, it was nearly dark and Alabama was gone. That was a week ago. I've spent my days wandering the woods, screaming her name, and my nights huddled on the mattress. I move beneath the small wooden bed. I hear things some nights, whispers, cries, but have yet to see another horror. I don't know if I'm crazy, if that thing was just a figment of my tired mind, or if it was as real as you or me. Either way, I can't leave. Not yet. Not until. I have to go. There's someone here. He was calling up at me from below the tower, a lost imitator hiker. I ignored him, but he won't go away. Now I can hear his footsteps thumping up the tower stairs. I can hear him coming for me. He'll be here any second. Wish me luck. 1. If you see a hiker, kill him before he kills you. He is an imitator. He is not human. I crouched beneath the window, by the door, and waited. I could hear the hiker's footfalls creaking up the wooden stairs, step after step, flight after flight. My breath felt hot and gluey in my throat. I tasted mold. I saw galaxies of dust swirling in shafts of sunlight. I tightened my grip on the fire extinguisher as the footsteps stopped just outside the door. I held my breath and watched a shadow wipe across the window. My heart pulsed forward, stopped, and lurched along to make up for the missing beat. A shape filled the glass just above me. I could see the man, late 40s, balding, khaki shorts, and a sun-faded tee, cupping his hands to the grimy pane as he peered into my cap. He stood there a moment, staring, eyes lingering over every nook and cranny of the claustrophobic space. Then he spoke. "Hello." A wave of relief washed over me. He was normal. He had to be. Things that pretended to be men didn't sound like your dad. My grip on the fire extinguisher relaxed. My shoulders rolled back with relief. Then he spoke again. His voice, cold and cruel, cut through the glass like the rattle of bones. "I see you." I looked up. He was staring right at me. His hands crashed through the window and fell together around my neck. I screamed as he tore me into the wall. I felt it sledge hammer into my back and drive out all the air. I wheezed and swung the fire extinguisher blindly. It met his forearm with a sickening crackle. His arm buckled as the bone holding it together snapped like a rotting twig. But he didn't lose his grip. It tightened. I swung over my shoulder and missed as he chuckled something in my ear. I didn't hear it. I couldn't hear anything over the hot roar of blood through my ears. The sound of the curtains of my life slowly closing like the darkness that swallowed the corners of my vision. The room blurred and flared around me. I was weightless. My strength was flagging. I was dying by the hand of the imitator who throttled me through broken, jagged glass, the glass which bit into his arms and tore back bleeding snarls of flesh. Then my grip found the black hose, the one strapped to the body of the fire extinguisher like a dead snake. An idea clipped through me with a bolt of adrenaline. I planted my feet and threw myself back. That moment is a blur. I remember hitting the glass and crashing through it. I remember a million scintillating shards tumbling down like snow made of diamonds. His grip left my neck. I sought air through my lungs as I felt my feet hit solid ground, lose it, before my ass went thudding to the wooden catwalk surrounding the cabin. I lurched to my feet, hose in hand, and scanned the ground for the imitator whose throat would soon know the taste of flame retardant. I was going to jam it down his mouth and pump him full like a foie gras duck. He wasn't there. I stood alone for one confusing instant before I heard a distant crack. It came from below. I inched toward the tower's railing and peered down at the ground. I saw a red smear. I saw a broken, folded up thing, a rag doll that was once a man, or once something that looked like one. The imitator was dead, so that was that. I stood like that for a while, just staring, watching a puddle of blood expand beneath his ruined corpse. When I found I could stand no more, I sauntered inside and curled up under the bed. I instantly fell into a dreamless sleep. I woke up to the sound of singing, soft and tinkling like the voice of a music box. It was coming from the woods. I slapped myself awake and pulled out the notebook, scanning the list of rules for one about the singing thing. I saw none. I grabbed a stubby pencil I'd found in the desk and made a note. 9. Something sings in the woods. Early evening. I would update later if I looked at rule number 8, the illegible graphite smudge, like it had been written then erased. I ran my finger over the back of the page and, sure enough, felt swirls and lines, writing indentations. I flattened out the page and gripped the pencil over the forgotten rule. I shaded, slowly at first, not wanting to fudge the transfer. I flipped back the page and saw letters resolving out of paper pulp. It's A. I kept shading, slowly, diligently, checking my progress every so often. 5 minutes later I had rule number 8. It read, simply, it's a lie. That was all. 6 words with no meaning at all. I sighed and fell back on the empty bed frame. I turned to face the woods. Deep in though, trees yawned to the horizon. And back again, an ocean of pines and firs as far as the eye could see. A great nothing. I had an idea. I booted up my laptop and called open Google Maps. I wouldn't be leaving until I found my dog, but I might as well prepare myself for the landscape. It pinwheeled for a minute, too, then, nothing. I saw a blue dot, presumably me, painted on an endless white grid. There were no coordinates, no roads or rivers, no woods or mountains, just horizontal and vertical lines, nothing at all. I collapsed the laptop and found myself laughing. It was a manic, humorless sound, but I couldn't help myself. This was all too perfect. It really was. Hikers who tried to kill you, tree monsters, missing dogs. It was a regular laugh riot. I could feel myself starting to crack, could feel the tears nibbling at my eyes, threatening to. There was a sound I didn't recognize. It was foreign after a week of nothing but strange cries, creaking wood, leaves rattling in the wind. It was a bark. I shot up and rushed over to the window. I peered down at the ground below, expecting disappointment, expecting some mangy mutt nipping at a squirrel. Instead, I saw a rust-colored border collie at the tree line. I saw my dog Alabama. I took the stairs 2 at a time. The wind flew through me as I belted down the tower and out onto flat ground. Alabama yipped happily and lurched toward me, but her leash snapped taut, holding her back. I slowed, my eyes widening. There was someone holding her leash. My neck prickled with dread as I scanned the shadows cast by ancient trees. Then, a man stepped out of the gloom. He was old, older than the land, a wild thing with crazy eyes and a huge, scraggly beard, his clothes patched and mended. But no, his eyes weren't crazed, they were mild and leveled at mine. They were filled with humanity. "Who are you?" I heard myself ask. He smiled. It lit up his whole face. "I'm the one who started that list," said the ancient mountain man, as I nuzzled my dog, and she nuzzled back. He looked past me, his face wrinkling as he peered at the twisted, bleeding corpse of the hiker crumpled just past the tower. "What happened there?" he asked. "Made good work of that poor fella, I see." I frowned. I thought, but he's an imitator, right? I glanced at the gory tableau, then looked away, my stomach roiling. Right, an imitator, the old man mused. Suddenly, and without fanfare, he turned from me and strode back into the woods, pulling my dog along with him. "Best we go now," he called back. "There's sure to be more." I hesitated, not wanting to leave the safety and sunlight of the clearing for the quiet gloom of the crowded woods. But he had my dog, and maybe it was time I finally get answers. I learned the meaning of rule number 8 not long after. "So you were the first?" I asked as he had led me up a narrow, overgrown trail which carved through the clutter of Mother Nature. It was a constant obstacle course, skirting rotting logs and felled branches. "That's right," he said. "It was a long, long time ago. He trailed off like his thought had wandered off before he'd caught it. An awkward silence settled in. I cleared my throat. "How'd you meet Mr. Aberdeen?" "Mr. He frowned. "Kent Aberdeen. The guy." I gestured back at the tower. "Oh, yes, of course. That was a lifetime ago. A lifetime." I looked around. The woods fell away, shifting into an endless riot of trees and brush warring for space. "Where are we going?" I asked. He stopped in his tracks so suddenly that I nearly plowed headlong into his bony back. I saw he was staring off into nothing, head cocked slightly, as if listening to a whisper that only he heard. My heart slowly rose in my chest from a low, steady trot into a loud, thundering gallop. Something was wrong. This wasn't right at all. I looked at Alabama, and she looked back, her leash still coiled around his fist. "I had some questions about the list," I said, trying to keep the fear from my voice. "There was a rule, number 8. It was scribbled out. It said, 'It's a lie. We are the wicked ones,'" he snarled in a jagged voice. My heart jolted dizzyingly. I looked up and the old man looked back, eyes feral and hungry, mouth split into a crooked sneer that displayed not enough teeth. "What?" I asked, my voice coming from a distant place. "We are the wicked ones," he said again, slowly advancing on me. "We are all the wicked ones. Time is a flat circle by which all things, good and bad, abide. We have always been, and will always be, and you will join us, like those before and after, and together we will all ride off into the final midnight." His eyes swam back into his head, clouding into ugly white marbles, as the tight, pink seam set into his untamed beard tore apart, first into an agonized, toothy grimace, then distending into something else entirely. It was as though invisible hands were tearing his mouth apart, pulling it far wider than any mouth should go. Alabama yipped and snapped against her leash, which was cemented in one crooked claw, his long, bony fingers curled inward like a dead spider, fingers that were crackling, expanding, growing long and jagged as the rest of the wicked one grew with it. He expanded before me. Bony, slumped shoulders rose higher with a series of sickening crackles and pops, and legs as narrow and knobby as a horse's grew into tall, uneven stilts. It towered above me, a malnourished beast hiding behind a scraggly beard, its face, cheeks hollow and emaciated, pulled into a wide, frozen scream. I felt my legs buckle as I looked past him and saw the others. Half a dozen wicked ones watched me from the woods, men and women, young and old, mouths wide in silent agony. The ones who came before. A dry wheeze, the sound of a mummy surrendering its soul, sighed out of the old man's mouth. I stood there, frozen in raw, tingling terror, until Alabama howled. Her cry of despair, the one that said, "I'm scared, I want to go," slapped me into motion. I grasped my dog's harness and dispatched the leash. She belted off down the trail. As the wicked ones broke into movement, I ran for all mankind. My legs steamed beneath me, pumping on some automatic function that was buried deep within my lizard brain. I could feel them whisking after me, could picture their jagged, bony legs blurring through the landscape as they flew through the forest like an autumn breeze. I was in the clearing before I knew it. My dog wasn't. I stood there for a sickening moment, looking around as my stomach tottered dizzily at the lip of a drop. Then I saw a flash of rust. It was Alabama bounding up the tower stairs, 3 at a time. I fell in after her, hitting the first step and then the next, and then the next, and then the... My foot plunged through a rotten plank, snaring me a quarter way up the tower. I glanced back and saw the wicked ones. With a cry, I wrenched my foot free. The rotten plank fell away, spiraling down to the ground as I planted my feet and lunged upward. I hit one landing after the next, circling the tower as I ran for everything I was worth. Without breaking stride, I glanced down and saw, oh God, like a family of giant spiders, the wicked ones clawed their way up the tower, half of them free climbing the side, the other half flooding up the stairs. I staggered the rest of the way up with my lungs screaming and my heart drowning. My chest felt full of hot lead which made the world around me throb like a living thing. The burning stitch in my side flared angrily as I threw open the cabin door and burst inside. Alabama was coiled beneath the bed, a high, frightened growl brewing in the back of her throat. I grabbed the notebook as the watchtower shook and groaned. They were nearly here. My eyes blurred over the list of rules, scanning for a way to defeat them. 3. Beware the wicked ones. I've only seen them once. I'm not sure what purpose they serve. They haven't bothered me. There was nothing. No weakness. No Achilles heel to be severed. Nothing but the megaphone. Rule number 6 said that such a thing would flee at the frequency of a megaphone. And since I didn't have a sawed-off shotgun shoved down my pants, I lunged for the megaphone dangling from a peg on the wall. Just as a wicked one exploded through the window, glass erupted in a shimmering cloud as the thing tore its way inside. Alabama issued a high growl and lunged, clamping her jaws around the wicked one's bony ankle. This one was a woman, tall and skeletal, her face the distended O of a silent scream. My dog thrashed her head with the fervor of a starving beast on an injured elk. The wicked one moaned and batted one elongated limb at Alabama. It impacted her side with the muffled crack of an axe splitting a log and sent her flying across the room. Alabama hammered one wall with a startled cry and crumpled limply to the ground. No, I roared as I stripped the megaphone off the wall. The wicked one whipped toward me, eyes dumb and blind, limbs flickering like jointed tentacles. I gripped the mouthpiece, keyed the button, and stuffed it next to the cone. A deafening whine filled the cabin, an ear-splitting wall of noise which drove out everything else. The wicked one flew back with a high shriek, its body crumpling in on itself as it tried to escape the inescapable. It floundered, tripped, and went tumbling outside as its body, its tall, wicked body, began to shrivel, wither, waste away before my eyes. Viscous black fluid, the color of death, flowed from its eyes, nose, and ears. Droplets of fluid hit the ground and sizzled, eating through the wood like fast-acting acid. Without thinking, I blew outside, the megaphone held forward like a crucifix in a warding-off gesture. Two wicked ones, one pumping up over the tower railing, the other staggering up the stairs, wheezed back, hands going to their heads, bodies trembling as they recoiled from the noise. The instantly withered like slugs on hot asphalt, bodies disintegrating into wrinkled sheets as fluid ran from every orifice. The one on the tower railing pinwheeled back and disappeared over the side. The other folded down the tower stairs like a puppet with cut strings, spraying black goo as it went, goo which immediately disintegrated all it touched. I watched, frozen and stunned, as the wicked one's blood burned away the staircase like it was flash paper. The others had fled. On the ground below, I saw crooked, uneven shapes disappearing into the tree line, but I couldn't move, couldn't look away. I was transfixed. I stood and stared as blood that burned like acid ate through the stairwell. By the time it had stopped, half of the stairs had melted away. I found myself stranded atop the tower, with no way of getting down. I was shipwrecked in a sea of trees, half of the tower stairs having burned away with the life of the wicked ones. I was completely alone with nothing, and no one to. A whine cut through my despair. At first I thought it must have been the wind, hooting up and around the tower, but then it came again. I was in motion before I knew it. I lurched inside the ruined cabin, the one with blown out windows and scattered acid holes in the floor, and looked around. At first I didn't see her. I squinted against the hellish flare of sunlight bouncing off broken glass. Alabama was right. Where I'd left her, crumpled on the floor in a loose, lifeless heap. A wave of emotion slammed through my chest. I started to cry. Huge, body-racking sobs tore through me as I realized she isn't alive. I had just been imagining it. I cried until Alabama tilted her head and offered a low, forlorn whine. The tears came harder, sweeping through me in a great flood as I rushed to her side, absently skirting one of the fist-sized holes, and swept her up into my arms. She planted slobbery kisses on my cheeks as I buried my face in her fur, pulling a deep lungful of damp dog scent the way a smoker might inhale their first cigarette of the day, and sobbed. She allowed it for all of 5 seconds before wriggling out of my grasp. Alabama found her footing, cautiously eased forward, testing for pain, and finding none, then leapt atop the bed. She had a slight limp, but was otherwise her usual, goofy self. So that was us. 2 wounded soldiers trapped on the battlefield, the tide of war having momentarily pulled back. We ate dinner in silence, her slurping up a healthy serving of canned people food, and me having just the same. Afterwards I updated the rulebook for all the good that would do one, and watched darkness scrub away the light. I tried to sleep, found I couldn't, but tried anyway. God knows I'd need it. Come first light, I was going to war. The first of dawn marched in like an enemy force, and I was ready. I double-checked my makeshift armor, and took stock of my supplies. Thick rope, megaphone, Swiss Army knife, first aid kit, lighter fluid, Zippo lighter, crumpled pack of Marlboro Reds, food and water. Check, check, check. I moved outside the cabin and peered over the outer railing. The ground tore away from me, reminding me that this was a horrible idea. If I screwed up, I'd plummet to my death, and this was a horrible idea. I dropped down the duffel bag of supplies before I lost my nerve. I had padded the inside with a blanket, and it hit the ground with a muffled thump. Next came us. Alabama, double wrapped in a heavy quilted blanket, was roped to my chest like a baby in a papoose. She whined as I looped the rope around my legs and armpits in an ersatz harness. I double-checked the tether, making sure the rope was properly secured to cabin's doorframe. Then it was time to go. Time to go. I swallowed dryly, pulled myself up over the railing, coiled the rope around my fists, and leaned back all the way, my body weight counterbalanced by my feet. Alabama clung to my abdomen like a warm, smoldering log, resting comfortably between stomach and legs as I slowly took the first step backward, then the next, and the next. About 20 feet above the ground, I'd hit a stretch of stairs that hadn't dissolved, but that still left me a 50-odd feet of dead, empty air. The rope slid through my hands, grinding against the thin t-shirt fabric protecting my palms as I slowly descended, my back to the ground, the top of the tower slowly pulling away from me. I worked my way down, 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 crack. The rope tore loose, and I fell, plummeted like a brick as the top of the tower ripped away from me, the frayed end of my lifeline whipping through the air like a dead snake. I hit the stairs, and erupted through them, Alabama howling in my ear, clawing and squirming at my chest like a bag of weasels. The ground flew through us like a freight train. There was the crunch of bone as darkness shot through my mind like an ice pick. Then there was only black. Alabama was dead. Not missing in the woods, not unconscious, dead. She must have broken my fall, saved my life. I had awoken, head throbbing, right eye knotted shut, bound to a tree. Thick, wax rope bit into my legs, chest, neck. My hands were glued to my side. My heart hammered heavily in my narrow ribcage. Tears, hot and salty, poured down my cheeks, and all I felt was a deep, steady heartbreak, like a manic gnome was needling at my insides with a smoldering poker. I didn't see Kent Aberdeen standing over me. I didn't see the watchtower, punching at the sky like a wooden fist. All I saw was Alabama's limp, crooked head spilling out of the bundle that was supposed to carry her to safety. It didn't have to be like this, Aberdeen said. I brewed a snot ball and spat it at him along with a hissed, "Screw you." He deftly stepped aside and shook his head. "No," he said, "it'll all be over soon." He had a deep fried ass. He chuckled at that. "You're doing a good thing," he said, "and I'll have her back, Amelia." He sounded febrile, like his battered mind had finally split in two under the great axe of isolation. "What are you saying?" "It doesn't much matter anymore," he said with a sigh. "Just know you're making a great sacrifice in the name of another life." A red ball of anger manifested in my gut, slowly boiling into a white-hot rage. "Tell me," I screamed. "Tell me why she's dead." I started to sob for everything that had happened. For my dead dog, for the ruin of my life. Aberdeen looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not a man living in the shadow of murder and psychopathy, but of pain and sorrow. "You were supposed to be the last," he said quietly. "The last. You were never going to leave. None of them were. But you were supposed to be the last." "Why?" I groaned, voice a hoarse whisper. "Why?" He swallowed. "This place, it's like no other. It's a foul jungle, an animal kingdom corrupted by dark ideas." "But why?" I pleaded. He opened his mouth to answer, paused, the words trapped in his throat. He was looking past me now, face wrinkled with confusion. "What?" he started, bemused. No, this wasn't the deal." There was a loud crunch from the woods to my back. The sound of movement, getting closer. Aberdeen's eyes swam with horror. "Where is she?" Aberdeen cried to the quiet afternoon. "Where's my daughter?" Flack. A vine shot past me and disappeared through Aberdeen's eye. A spray of brain, skull, and silver hair erupted from the back of his skull. He collapsed into a slack pile of limbs as the sharp, jagged vine, studded with thorns and drenched in gore, withdrew from his eye socket with a wet crackle. I held still while my heart thundered against my ribs, desperate to escape. But we were both trapped, forced to watch as four massive shapes emerged from the woods. Tree talkers. They looked like men, giant, swollen men, born of the forest. Effigies made of leaves, bark, moss that seemed to shift and ripple like a reflection on water, each of them bearing a strange optical illusion, where they only took on the familiar shape of men when faced head-on. They stood before me and stared, their lifeless eyes like trapped pawns, ones which didn't obey the laws of physics. Their bodies pulsed, throbbed, breathed, as if they themselves were comprised of many living things. One of them raised his hand. The thorny vine of his index finger snaked forth, slithered around my leg in a slimy caress, then devoured my ropes. I fell forward, my body one cruel ache, vibrating with fear, rage, and a deep-rooted fatigue that seemed to sap my strength. Rough hands made of bark and vine grabbed my shoulders, hands behind which lived a terrible strength, one that could snap me like a rotting branch in a heartbeat. I didn't fight as I was dragged off into the woods. My gaze stayed with my dog, a final act of solidarity until she disappeared from view. I never saw the rust-colored border collie named Alabama again. The woods were normal until they weren't. Strange, otherworldly trees crept in, imposters among the ones I knew. Thick walls of brush, a deep purple flecked with gold, drew together. Huge black birds with red eyes went beating to the sky like spray from a shotgun. As the tree talkers pulled me through the woods, I was dragged until the idea of normal forest was lost in my mind, replaced by the alien jungle that now occupied my world, the one that seemed to breathe and watch us pass. The creatures whose footfalls sounded like trees creaking in the wind. The ones who didn't speak at all, despite their name. dragged me as the normal sky fell away, and a deep overcast took its place. I thought I saw a lone structure in the distance, a log cabin engulfed by thick, purple vines. Then it wiped from view and I saw nothing but the woods. Heinous, alien woods. It was that way for a while. My limp body dragged along, heels digging trenches in the soil, a thin trail of lighter fluid leaking after us. As I surreptitiously squeezed the bottle empty, I gripped the Zippo lighter in my pocket. It felt warm, familiar, the only thing keeping me rooted as I was forced through the forest and into the impossible kingdom. There I was received by the Queen of Trees, who met me with a deadly proposal, and I realized, with a sudden pang of horror, that the real nightmare had only just begun. I was dragged into a wide clearing fenced by a crude wall of trees, as though the flora itself dare not encroach this sacred territory. The jungle snarled away from us in colorful streaks. Deep purples, dark magentas, and muddy pinks colored the vines, leaves, and bark. It felt like a room, a throne room, one enclosed by growth on four sides. I looked up. Thick canopies of branches, interwoven like a tapestry, formed a loose ceiling. The tree talkers shoved me to the ground. A wall of pain slammed through my knees and trickled up my thighs, slowly settling into my gut like an icy marble. Something was broken. Something was definitely broken. Tears singed my eyes. I bit back a scream and focused my gaze, finding the dull, colorful vines, each as thick as my forearm, that carpeted the ground. They ran like petrified snakes toward the middle of the room, where they swelled up, spiraled, and formed the throne. That was where she sat in all her dreadful glory, the Queen of Trees. She was graceful, like a woman in her 60s who had been touched by flawless genes, hair smooth, startling silver, face bracketed by nearly imperceptible wrinkles. She looked like an old Hollywood icon, timeless in her dress of golden leaves, each shimmering as if painstakingly dipped in liquid gold. Amelia, I groaned. It was all that came to me. She must be Aberdeen's Amelia, the one he was so desperate to get back. The Queen of Trees smiled at me. It sent a cold shiver itching down my spine. It was a dead smile, lifeless. Yes, she said, her voice the sound of ice breaking. This is about her, isn't it? I frowned. My mind seemed occupied by an enemy force, one made of black fog that clouded my thoughts and made the world hazy. Why am I here? I asked, my voice a hoarse croak. Why did Aberdeen bring me here? Her eyebrows drew together in what was either irritation or amusement. Her face, as stony and cold as a slab of marble, made reading her emotions impossible. Then she smiled one of her dead, lifeless smiles. Now there's a name I haven't heard aloud in a long while, she said. I looked at her. Who are you? Her eyes bored through me, unamused. I'm the Queen of Trees, she said, but before that, well, that was a long time ago. Tell me, I groaned. It was another life. Really, the Queen of Trees replied, but I suppose you'll want to hear it all. She paused as if trying to keep the words from her lips. Aberdeen, a fool, the man I knew a lifetime ago, who kept me in chains, kept me from my fate. She spat. I knew him, but he never knew me. A foolish little man corrupted by what he could not see. My husband. I sat on the jagged ground as golden beetles scuttled between my feet and listened to her tell her tale. Long ago there was a family, a happy family, one with loud, exciting lives in the city. The man had a busy job, and his wife had a job of her own, raising their daughter. All was well, as it should be, until it wasn't. Dark ideas slithered in like vines between the cracks of what was a happy woman's mind, driving a wedge between man, wife, and child. The man tried everything to bring back the woman he knew, but nothing worked. At ends, he decided to move his family away from the concrete jungle, the one that had seemed to infect his wife like a disease. He searched near and far for a new place to lay roots, settling on a distant land that lived across the ocean. He bought them a cabin in the woods, hoping a healthy dose of nature would burn away the bad still infesting his wife's mind, and it did. But what the man didn't realize was that new thoughts had replaced the old ones, thoughts far worse than any thoughts should be. The woman had come to know something not even he would have believed. Destiny had driven her here. Her fate, as told by whispers in the wind and trees, was to lead a rotting kingdom out of the darkness and into the light. So she took her daughter to the kingdom, leaving the man, whose false goodwill had been the source of her malady all along, to wither and rot like the cabin in the woods. and so she ruled in quiet glory for many years, until she fell ill. Her kingdom began to die, corrupted by sickness. Bad things trickled in like slimy, diseased water, infesting her utopia and turning it foul. She knew it was time her daughter claimed the throne, but the young girl, now of age, was innocent of dark ideas. She was weak, and she would need a partner to rule alongside her. So the woman, too sick to find a suitor herself, made false promises to the graying man she once knew. "Find me someone and you can have her back," she lied. The man brought one, then many, but each and all were corrupted by the bad things that now hid in the shadows of her kingdom. The woman continued her search for years, growing weaker by the day, and still she found no one to rule by her daughter's side, until the boy with the dog, the one who defeated the crooked beasts that moved like shadows and fed off light. He was the one for her daughter. I looked up at her, and she looked down at me, her crown of black and gold thorns glinting in the light. She waited for me to speak. I cleared my throat, wiped the film of sweat off my brow. "Can I think about it?" I said. Her lips drew back over bone-white teeth in an ugly snarl. "It's written," she said, "in blood and death. Your fate, like mine, was cast upon you the moment you entered this world. Every decision you've ever made has led you here. You were born to stand before me." Jesus Christ, I thought, this woman is positively batshit. I glanced around and saw we were alone, but no, we weren't at all. The camouflaged shapes of tree talkers etched themselves out of the growth on either side. They stood silent sentry, waiting for orders. My eyes shot over my shoulder, trying to find the portal that had led us here, but the room had closed off. Past the queen's throne stood the same, but the growth behind her was withered, shriveled, dried out, like the world around us was bearing the symptoms of the queen's illness. I had no choice. "I'll do it," I said, fighting to my feet with a grimace. Did the lovely bride accept my hand? The queen smiled her dead smile, reading the deep, bitter sarcasm in my words. "I wouldn't try any foolery," she said. "You haven't yet known the feeling of vines as thin as thread, forcing their way through every vein, capillary, and artery in your meat husk. You wouldn't die, no, because I wouldn't let you. You wouldn't die until the network of tubes pumping red life through your bones had been replaced by bark." I tried not to shudder. "One thing," I said, feeling up my pockets in an act of garish pantomime. "I didn't bring any rings, metal or otherwise." The queen found no humor in this. She simply cocked her head and issued a single word, "Amelia." The princess stepped out from behind the throne, and my heart caught in my throat. She was stunning, no older than 20 with long, black hair, her skin a milky white, her lips warm and pink. She wore a black slip, one that seemed woven of anti-light, like her dress itself was made of shadow. "Yes, mother," she said in a slack, monotonous voice. Her eyes, glazed and distant, seemed not to see, as though she were in a kind of trance. The Queen of Trees, speaking in her cold, flat voice, told Amelia of the circumstance before beckoning me forth. Good Lord, I thought, this is insane. I leant forward. The Queen of Trees regarded me distrustfully until I took one of her daughter's hands in mine. "Amelia," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. She looked up at me, eyes clearing, brow furrowing. A bolt of awareness seemed to clip through her. A girl coming out of coma. She started. "Can you run?" I asked, my heart picking up pace. The Queen of Trees shot to her feet. "Stop that at once," she cried. "Can you run?" I asked Amelia again. "Stop that now," the Queen roared. "I knew your father," I said, fumbling in my pocket. "Kent Aberdeen." "Your father, Amelia, do you remember?" The Queen of Trees shouted something. I caught a blur of movement on both sides as her guards surged toward us. "My father," Amelia said, face flushing with color as long-forgotten memories fought to the surface. "Your father," I said, "he died for you. Now answer me. Can you run?" Her eyes focused on mine, seeing me, understanding what I was asking. "Yes," she said, "I think I can." The bottle of lighter fluid was up and out in an instant. A stream of yellow sprang from its spigot as I squeezed the last of its guts over the Queen of Trees. She staggered back, momentarily stunned. "Close your eyes," I said to the girl in black. The Zippo ignited with a satisfying click. I flicked it. It spiraled through the air, flame guttering, silver case flashing a wink of light. It touched the Queen of Trees, merely kissed her, and she went up in flame. The throne room ignited the instant she did with a hot whoosh. Walls of fire shot up from the ground, first tasting the trees, then devouring them. The tree talkers erupted, then crumpled like flaming effigies as their queen shrieked, the high, skin-crawling sound of something dreadful dying. In the embrace of flame, I grabbed Amelia and pulled her into motion. Pain lanced through my shin. As we fell into a run, I cried out and tripped forward. Hands caught me, pulled me to my feet, and dragged me into an agonized limp run. Amelia, the girl imprisoned by the woods, was free. Ahead of us, the wall that had been sealed over by a knot of tree trunks had pulled apart. The queen's dark magic was dying with her. Flaming branches and leaves danced through the air like hellish snow. As we disappeared from the throne room and into the jungle beyond, we ran as fire licked up the trail behind us, eating through the drying stream of lighter fluid I'd left behind like breadcrumbs. I cried. It was all I could do. I think she cried too, because the world tasted like salt and ash and salvation as we ran from the kingdom in flames. You may think you know the ending, but you don't. This isn't a fairy tale, and it doesn't end the way it should. We don't stagger to safety having beat the odds. Two newly minted heroes who have slayed the dragon. I don't sweep her off her feet and pull her into a long, passionate kiss. Hell, I just burned her mother alive, and besides, this is the real world. Things don't ever happen the way they should, and rarely do stories, especially these, have a happy ending, so you'll have to decide how it ends for yourself. I will tell you we escaped the nightmarish jungle. We limped through strange trees and clusters of brush as a raging sea of flame galloped at our heels. We passed the distant cabin, the one devoured by roots and vines, the one meant as a new beginning for a family fractured by dark ideas. They ran as the woods shifted from a colorful collage into an earthy green tapestry, the woods I knew. They ran until we hit a clearing from which grew a wooden watchtower. Alabama was gone, and so was Kent Aberdeen. That hurt the most. I wish she could have been here with me when the army of flame reached our little desert island. It's closer now, the fire. Columns of smoke rise from the woods, choking the sky of its blue innocence. The sun burns a deep blood red through the ashy gauze. That red sun, like Satan's eye watching us from a stolen heaven, makes me think this story won't have a happy ending, but I'll let you decide. Maybe we leave the tower behind, the one that stands above me as I write this now, and fight our way through the woods, me limping, her dragging me along. Maybe we find a road, the one that leads to Duty's diner. Maybe we sit in the booth where I first met her father and talk about a world she doesn't know over coffee and pie, but I don't think it ends that way. It's much too warm for happy endings. I can see the flames marching closer, a wall of heat announcing the fire's arrival like the breath of a dragon. The queen was right about one thing. Everything I've ever done has led me to this moment, but she was wrong about the ending. No one gets to write it for me, only I can do that. I guess it's time I get to work. I have a story. Those 4 simple words came out of my older brother's mouth back at that very night of July 24th, 2009, over a decade ago, a night that has since haunted and left me curious of what was truly wandering in the woodlands of that little oak forest. I've spent hours every night for the past year trying to find anything online that would at least give me something as simple as the name of that forest, but I've never found it. I stared up at him, looking at his pale, round face, illuminated by the orange glow of the campfire separating the two of us. I glared for a split second, cleared my throat as I hadn't said anything to anyone for the past few hours, and spoke with a condescending but humoring tone to my voice. You're kidding. No, I wasn't a disbeliever in cryptids, ghouls, and any monster that lurked in the dark crevices of the earth, whether they were undiscovered beings and creatures or something else entirely. But I obviously knew that whatever was going to come out of my brother's mouth was going to be a load of baloney. Allow me to describe what I mean. He's not a good liar, but always seemed to find it amusing no matter the situation. He'd tell my mother with a straight face that he didn't take one of my belongings, even though he was obviously hiding it behind his back. He'd tell my frustrated dad, who had just read his not-so-successful report card, that his C in algebra was a typo. In the end, my parents also had to sarcastically tell them that they believe him, and no matter what he did, never punished him for it, even though my mom can see his arm folded behind his back, and my dad can most definitely tell that Mr. Harris would not make a typo on something as crucial as a school report card, but their inability to continue fighting with him became more and more distinct throughout the years, because one thing that was especially present to his lies that he absolutely would never admit to his lies. One night back in 2003, my mom walked into his room and told him that he shouldn't be playing video games because he obviously didn't finish his homework, and this resulted in a full-blown tantrum by a literal 9-year-old. He crossed his arms, did his notorious scowl, and stomped his feet until my mom threw her hands up and walked out in frustration, leaving him to resume playing on his PS2 and ignoring the fact that his science teacher, Mrs. White, would blow a vein in her forehead when she discovers his unfinished homework. And just a few years later, when he was 11 years old, he angrily refused to talk to my father about the detention he received that January afternoon. His physical education teacher had caught him shoving down a girl in his class, and when he confronted him, he angrily screamed and spat in his face until he had to literally drag him out by the arm of the physical education class. I remember his quotes so vividly that night to his constantly changing story that he was trying to keep explaining to my father, "I didn't do it. Alyssa pushed me first. Mr. Davis is the one lying, and he pushed me first." My attempts at relenting against him, telling him that a teacher wouldn't just push a student because they felt like, were met with angry yells directed toward me, exclamations that I was the stupid liar. So, yeah, if you couldn't tell, I'm not very fond of my brother, but I'm entirely off topic. Immediately, my brother scowls in frustration. My sarcastic remark had already upset him, and I knew that if I didn't dial it back in a few seconds, my parents, sleeping inside the RV, would be immediately awakened and get on my case for making my brother upset. No, I'm serious. God, Michael, can you not be an asshole for 2 seconds? My brother was a foul mouth. It started when he was 14 years old, and he pretty much cherished his vocabulary of swear words. Both of my parents were floored when the first time he casually dropped an F-bomb during dinner, and while my mom didn't care what he said, unless it was an insult directed toward someone, my dad made it absolutely clear that he wanted absolutely no swears in his presence again. And if not, he'd make him mow our huge front lawn every week for the next month. Yet when I was the one who got caught, my dad would go ballistic and claim he'd trash every electronic in my room if he caught me swearing again. Whatever, fine, I'll humor you, Josh. Tell me your story. Take it seriously. I thought it would be nice, seeing how we're near this campfire in the middle of a cool night. I rolled my eyes, just barely able to contain any more sarcastic remarks toward him. Alright, I will. Go ahead. I leaned back at the fallen log I was sitting on, vividly remembering how uncomfortable it was, but that it was better than sitting on the ground and having my mother get frustrated the next morning when she sees the stains of grass and dirt on the back of my pants. I vividly remember my brother looking around, almost as if he was searching for something. He was most definitely eager to tell me his story, yet when I let him, he suddenly became completely unprepared. I swallowed the urge to chuckle. In a few seconds, he asked me a question I didn't anticipate. You know what a skinwalker is, right, Mikey? I hated it when he called me Mikey, because most of the time, he does it to annoy me. But did he just ask me what a skinwalker is? I mean, I recognized the name and some details of what exactly one was, but I had no idea he even cared about mythological creatures. I immediately began to think, trying to remember details, and the only thing I could prominently remember was that they were mythical monsters that could disguise themselves as humans by wearing their flayed skin like a suit. Sure, yeah. No, you don't. He scoffs and crosses his arms. Now, all we're missing is the repeated stomping and scarlet red coloration to his face, and we'll have a blown-up episode. Fine, explain to me. He begins to speak, talking in this obnoxiously ghoulish voice, doing those stereotypical ghost noises. In as much as detail he could remember, he informed that skinwalkers are Navajo witches, or warlocks capable of utilizing black magic to shape-shift into animals, either through possession or disguising by flaying the pelt off the animal and draping it over them like some sort of demented suit of flesh and skin. And as I expected, that very method can be done to humans. I remember that he tells me a specific detail that even after learning about mythological skinwalkers online, I don't seem to understand where he got from. Maybe he either made it up or got it from an odd source. I wanted to bring it up to see if others know about it, and they say that the longer the witches and warlocks wear their striped coats to disguise themselves, they become more and more of the very being they're disguising as. The skin suits may eventually merge into their skin and become their new exterior one day, or gradually, bit by bit, they begin to sprout irreversible animalistic features. Gray wolf fur, white eagle feathers, green snake scales. They start to hallucinate, lose memories, become confused, and eventually absolutely psychotic, and eventually revert to a completely animalistic phase, losing all of their humanity for good. The skinwalkers become their own skin. All skinwalkers know that they must not wear skin suits, composed out of various different sources, as if they become their skin. He chuckles slightly. Quite the patchwork abomination may come out. They don't have a nickname for those types of transformed skinwalkers, probably because they're so horrific that they should never be named. I'm a bit brought back. For once in his life, what was coming out of his mouth was actually interesting to hear, whether it was a lie or not. He seems to see my petrified state, mesmerized by his story, and slowly speaks again, asking me a question. Now, when a skinwalker steals one's skin, what happens to the body? It took a few seconds to respond back, as I had to abruptly escape my trance. I had no idea. Maybe they ate it. Maybe they disposed of it via burial. Maybe they dismember them and stick their severed limbs together to make makeshift meat scarecrows to traumatize the village the now deceased person was from. It took me a second before eventually I had a pretty odd answer, but a pretty plausible one. They're witches, right? What if they turned them into mindless puppets, like minions, or something like that? My brother's eyes widen for a split second, and he continues. You got it right on the money, somewhat. I was stunned for a few seconds too. I didn't expect that to be the absolute right answer, so I was quite shocked that apparently my weird guess was right. Again, my brother continues. They call them the skinned, victims of skinwalkers. The whole process of becoming a skin can't seem to work on animals, and it's believed it's because their brains aren't complex enough. But the process can't work on most humans. They become reanimated, like zombies, but not quite. From head to toe, their skin has been removed, usually in a completely crude fashion, exposing layers and layers of peeled back flesh, lacerated muscles, and exposed tendons. They may be severely injured in appearance, as death by skinwalker is no clean one, so claw marks and tears could be dug into their flesh, leaving open scars that never heal. The lower half of their skulls has been peeled open, exposing the skull's jawbone and the permanently exposed teeth of the person. Some say the tongue is gouged out prior to the process so that the skin can't call for help if it retains some humanity, while some say the eye sockets are stabbed, blinding the skin so it can't see what it's become. Some say the skinned have twisted limbs, forcing them to walk on all fours along the forest floor, and some say the skinned are disemboweled, leaving empty abdominal cavities with no present organs. People don't know why they do this, but most believe it's simply the result of inflicted wounds prior to death, and punctured holes through the side of the chest through the heat may symbolize that the skinwalker is a past lover of the victim who had their heart broken, and thus seeks revenge by stabbing straight through their own right before death. I got very curious, so I decided to shoot him a simple question. Why do the witches make the skinned? What's the point of having minions if they're all damaged, reanimated corpses? Again, you were somewhat right. I glared at him, confused. The skinned are not brought to life by the skinwalker themselves. When they obtain their skin suits, they usually abandon them to allow the elements to do the rest, break down their exposed bodies, and turn them into mulch to be absorbed into the earth over the course of several years. But through some supernatural influence, perhaps a failed attempt at revival through another outer force, the corpse becomes a skinned. I stop glaring and ask another question. If they're not minions, what do they do? My brother chuckles again. I could see why, as he loved everything gruesome. He saw Freddy vs. Jason when it came out in theaters back in 2003 and had the time of a lifetime. They look for their stolen skin. They roam the forest they were killed in for eternity, searching for whatever bastard witch or warlock left them a bleeding husk. A supernatural essence within them leaves them unable to rot and die, but over the years, their soul begins to crumple, and what little humanity was trapped in the near mindless being they have become fades away for good. The skinned are flayed of not just their bodies, but their humanity. I shivered pretty damn hard. Stuff was scary. The idea of having some mythical creature robbing you of your skin and turning you into an undying zombie, endlessly searching for your lost flesh as you mentally wither into nothing freaked me out so much that my brother immediately noticed as he laughs and points toward me. "Huh, you're scared. I can see you shaking." I didn't like being caught in a moment of fear, so I retaliated. "No, I'm shivering because it's cold." That was a half lie. While the faint wind brushed against my back, the glowing heat in front of me mostly canceled it out. Obviously, my brother caught me in my bluff, pointing at the nearby campfire, which was gradually dying down by now. "Oh, yeah, I'm sure it's absolutely freezing, and dark too. If only there was something here that could provide us heat and light." "Alright, fine. You did scare me, but the fire's dying down. Let's just go in the RV and get to bed. It's probably way too late, and Dad didn't want us to stay up late so we can wake up tomorrow." "No way, we're going to be back on the road tomorrow by noon. I want to spend as much time here as I can. We can just sleep in the RV during the day." "And do you have any suggestions about what we can do? I can continue telling you a story. A friend of mine told me that he ran into a skinwalker a few years ago, wearing the skin suit of a dead wolf. I don't think he was noticing the gradually fading glow of the campfire, so I pointed it out to him. Fire is dying down. That's because nearly all our fuel has been used up. Mikey, do me a solid and go get some twigs. Josh, you want me to go out into the dark, damp forest, alone, and in the middle of the night to go get more fuel? What, you scared that a skinwalker will pop out and take your skin? Don't be a wimp. There's sticks everywhere. It's not like you have to walk miles to find some. Come on and hurry before the fire's dead." "No, rock, paper, scissors for it, and no 2 out of 3. If I win, you do it." My brother scoffs in frustration, mumbling "fine" under his breath, and stands up, approaching me. I vividly remember our little match of RPS. I was hoping that I didn't have to go, as I didn't feel like doing so, but my choice of scissors against his choice of rock proved otherwise. I win. Rock breaks scissors. "Now, go." My brother quickly speaks and points over my shoulder. I grumbled in frustration, but knew I couldn't protest, as it was my idea, so I turned around, kicked my feet, and took a couple slow steps. My brother's joking demand of "if the fire's dead, before you're back, the skinwalker might get you" got on my nerves, but motivated me to pick up the pace, as I wanted to be done with it as soon as possible. I think I was walking for a good few minutes. I don't remember what I was doing, but I think I just had my hands in my pockets, thinking about our little vacation trip. Back in early July, our parents thought our excessive days of just playing video games for 12 hours straight, then going to sleep, was corrupting our minds, and they wanted us to take a 5-day road trip to clear our minds. Both of them had entirely different views on video games, as while my mom normally just didn't want us to be excessively having our eyes glued to a TV screen, my dad absolutely believed in the whole idea that video games caused violence and banned graphic video games, strictly limited video game time on the family computer, and told us games like GTA 3 were made by a bunch of low-lives who want to brainwash kids and literally turn them into raving lunatics. Until we were 18, he wanted absolutely nothing excessively violent on our gaming consoles, or that if we're caught with it, we have to not only return the game from where we bought it, but humiliate yourself by writing an apology letter to whoever it was brought from. And if that wasn't enough salt in the wounds, very limited video games for the next month. After around 3 or so minutes, my train of thought came to a halt, and I remembered what I was out here for. I took my hands out of my pockets and searched around, eventually finding piles of fallen wooden branches on the ground, before I scooped up as much as I can with prominent handfuls, before turning around and starting to make my way back. Walking back, my train of thought kept going again, and I picked up where I left off. If it wasn't obvious, my father loves to utilize fear as a scaring mechanism into stopping us from doing things he doesn't like, while my mother absolutely hates it, and it sparked countless fights between them. Just before the trip, Dad got curious one night, found some lewd sites on the history of my brother's personal computer, and lost his mind. Mom tried to tell him he was just curious, while my brother just flat out called him out on a supposed bluff. Eventually, Mom shooed us out of the living room and fought with Dad in private for an hour straight, so much that it actually exhausted him. I heard very little details through the muffled shouts in the next room over, but I could tell Mom was sick of Dad's method of traumatizing us. But Dad thinks that Mom's giving us so much freedom that we think we could do whatever we want. So, while they stated this whole road trip was to give some fresh air, I think it was mainly because of the tension in between them, but they didn't want to flat out tell us. And then I stopped. Nothing had caught my attention. My whole train of thought just stopped, like it derailed. It wasn't like I just abruptly snapped back out. It's as if it had just abruptly concluded and wrapped itself up. That's what it hit me, why I stopped. I looked around in confusion, searching through the shadowy trunks and branches of the old oak trees before me. I was frozen, and that's when I truly realized why I had stopped. I didn't recognize where I was. I remember that even while I was first thinking, I could recognize subtle details in my trail. A lonely, rotted tree stump, a crumpled up can of either beer or soda resting on a pile of leaves, and a few jagged patches of gravel I had walked over. I searched and searched and searched for any of those details, but they were nowhere to be seen. No, it's not possible. I had turned around a full 180 degrees when I got those sticks. It's not like I just got lost out of nowhere. I searched. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. It was like a horror movie, building up to a sudden loud jump scare, a blaring scream to deafen me, in the face of a diseased, mutated creature to lunge out of the darkness, to maul me and take my skin. God damn it, I yelled out in frustration. If my father was just a few feet away, I would have gotten a raw slap to the back of my head for yelling God's name in vain. But he wasn't. I was dead lost, in the middle of a forest, alone while it was in the middle of the night. I was immediately consumed with a chilling feeling, one stronger than the weak, ice-cold winds. It was my blood freezing, and shivers running up and down my spine. It was panic. Joshua, I yelled out. I knew wherever I was, he probably couldn't hear me, but I just wanted noise in the forest, besides my own gradually quickening exhales. I yelled again, frozen in place. Joshua, nothing. No, I knew where I was just a few minutes ago. Never in my life had I felt so paranoid. I was absolutely shocked to my core. I could barely move my upper body, while everything below my pelvis was anchored to the ground. I vividly remember trying to lift my left foot, but it was as if I was wearing a steel toe boot welded to the ground. I just stood there for about a few minutes straight, just trapped in place as my breathing grew more and more hysterical. I couldn't move my legs, I couldn't hear anything, I couldn't even open my hands and drop the handfuls of twigs stuck to my palms. It was so surreal, and my own personification was the only thing keeping me from full-blown trembling and absolute shock. I felt lightheaded as I was breathing like my life depended on it, and then, just then, I heard it, the first noise within the last 8 or so minutes, a noise that I can recall in so much detail, despite its immensely short length and abruptness. I didn't even know what it was at first, but it eventually came into my mind, and when I realized what it most likely was, I nearly vomited right then and there. It was the loud crunch of a twig snapping under someone's foot. Joshua, I screamed so loud my voice cracked, and for half a second went high-pitched. At that very moment, I didn't give a damn about whatever it was potentially being a wild animal, or an escaped, knife-wielding mental patient sneaking up on me. It's as if nothing in the world mattered to me at that very moment. A moment that only lasted just a few seconds, until I heard it again, another twig snapping. I didn't know where it was coming from, but I absolutely knew that it was getting closer. Not like this, anything like this. I remembered that glimmers of life seemed to flash before my eyes, potential deaths in my mind. I get mauled to death by feral animals, and semi-eaten. I get gutted to death by a maniacally laughing serial killer, and buried under a huge patch of gravel, where I never escape my petrified state, and get discovered in the morning, curled on the forest floor in the fetal position. Died of exposure. Would have preferred that last method. It was the least gruesome. I then heard it. What came next was at first entirely familiar, the third snap of a twig, but was followed just milliseconds later by a sound that I can easily describe, but can't put together in words how bone-chilling it was. A slow, guttural groan. It was a person, or what I was hoping it was. From the best I can put together, it was like the final breath of a smoker succumbing to lung cancer, or the mangled, raspy exhale of someone's life being sucked out them via strangulation. It was human, all right, yet not natural. It was the sound of absolute agony. No man can generate that sound at will. I heard it again, got another listen to it, much clearer than before. It was sickening, beyond disturbing, though it felt different than before, and it took me a few seconds to understand why. The first sound was an exhale, and this one was an inhale. I'm praying by now, praying that whatever is happening is just some messed up prank by Josh, and stuff like the inability to locate those subtle details, and his malformed gasps were just my mind twisting details from an excessive amount of fear. Maybe I had dozed off at the campfire, and whatever this was a nightmare. I would pinch myself if I could, but by now my fingers were stuck together, and all I could do was wiggle the tips of my thumbs. I heard it again, a twig snapping, followed by a mangled inhale. I stayed silent for a couple seconds. There it was, a twig snapping, a grotesque exhale. It was almost had a rhythm, and after a while, I seemed to recognize that the spaces in between the combination of a breaking branch and warped export, or intake of breath, was almost perfect every day, so much that I even counted it to be nearly exactly 6 seconds. I couldn't really tell if my fear had faded away by then. I was perplexed by these near-inhuman sounds, and the only thing affecting me was my inability to mostly move, and the faint winds that I had been so long in that my teeth were chattering. Abruptly, everything just ended. The unusual noises were gone, and now I could at least hear the faint whooshing of the wind before me. I felt pins and needles in my hands and legs, so intense that they hurt, as if all the blood flow in them had stopped. I straightened my fingers, flexed my toes, and gradually lifted my left foot, finally taking my first step in what I think was at least 20 minutes. I think at that moment, I was convinced whatever just occurred was some sort of fear-induced psychotic episode. Those strange noises were auditory hallucinations my brain created, and finally I managed to snap out of my episode, and the noises abruptly left. Though, upon a couple seconds after the ending of my presumed episode, I felt an unusual warmth in my face, so I opened my left hand, allowing me to drop the mass of sticks as they crashed to the ground, and rubbed my face in confusion, tears running down my eyes. I was involuntarily crying, but I now knew that it was just all a part of the episode. I started to slowly walk again, but I was still recovering from what the hell had just happened, so while I wanted to run until I knocked all the air in my lungs, I could only slowly drag my feet. I felt an overwhelming feeling of warmth wash over, a sign that everything seemed to be okay now. How absolutely wrong I was. How dead wrong I was. Never in my life had I ever been that wrong before, and my body gave me an overwhelming feeling that it was all over. But all that really was the appetizer before the main course. What happens next has traumatized me to a massive degree, and for the next few weeks, I had recurring nightmares where I'm forced to relive this moment every time. If I had a full bladder, I would have definitely emptied by then. What came next was not human. Nothing capable of living can generate this noise. Not even a demon straight out of hell could. In this horribly distorted, jarring voice I can nowhere near replicate when retelling this story to my friends and family, it uttered a single word I could not understand at first. But after this, I finally realized what it said. Skin. I don't know what scared me more, the abruptness and volume of it, or the fact that unlike the sounds of snapping twigs and raspy groans, I could understand where it was coming from. A few feet behind me, then I heard it. The dragging, the crawling, the swishing of soil, the cracking of the branches I had dropped behind as it writhed over them like a giant leech. Before I could fully register its existence, I had gradually spun my head around and got a good look at what it was. It was what I wasn't hoping for. It was a twisted, mutilated human being. And if you couldn't tell from all the build-up, it was a skinwalker victim, flayed nearly to the skeleton, with dissected layers of muscle, flesh, and other body parts exposed. formerly under the layers of skin that formerly protected its body. I remember the face, gutted and punctured with the right side looking like someone had taken a claw hammer to it, so much I could see sections of its skull, its empty right eye socket, and nasal cavity were crusted with a combination of what looked like dried blood and mucus, while the left eye had absolutely no color. It was dead. It was not alive. It shouldn't be alive. Its teeth, still pearly white as if it was alive, and almost glowing in the moonlight, were fully exposed from the lack of lips, yet were no pair of dentures. They were gnarled, sickly, and stained with various colors of substances I didn't even want to get a better look at. I could now understand its malformed breathing, as it was split wide open, exposing a gaping hole in the front of his neck. What I formerly thought was the sound of crawling was not crawling. That thing was walking on all fours, its elbows pointed up to the sky, and while I couldn't see it at first, its knees were twisted backwards, allowing to essentially move its legs backwards. One thought was in the mind during the good 10 or so seconds I had my eyes set on this creature, not the fact that I was literally looking at a real, genuine version of the creature my brother had told me just half an hour prior, but the fact it was dragging its extremities along the ground and scuttling toward me. I heard it speak again, this time seeing its mouth move. I'll understand how it could muster fully audible words, with no lips on its face and visibly damaged muscles in its jaws, but it could. Skin. Thoughts flooded my mind so rapidly that I could barely register them. As soon as they popped up, what I was looking at was not a creature that should be alive. It was an abomination that freed inside from whatever rotted chamber it had been locked in years ago, and I needed to get the fuck away from it now, before my body could reparalyze itself. I opened my grip, allowing me to drop my other handful of twigs before I turned around, took a random path in the direction I had been searching, and ran like my life depended on it. And when I took off, I think it did, because I heard that creature speak the only 3 words I could understand at that moment. Give it back, give it back. The end of its final word gradually began to warp as it transformed into a ghoulish howl. By the time I had gotten around 10 or so yards from it, I heard its howl twist into what I could describe as a ear-splitting shriek, one my brother would never have the lung capacity to do. I knew what I did. I pissed it off, and before I could start praying that it was slower than me, I remember what kind of being I was dealing with. I heard several twigs break per second, somehow through its agonizing screech. It was chasing. It was chasing me. I didn't know how long I ran, but I ran until there was little air in my lungs and stomach bile in my throat. I narrowly threw up in my mouth, yet I kept running because I could hear that thing in hot pursuit, and through an absolute miracle, I saw it. The silhouette of my parents' RV through the gnarled branches I was plowing through, blocking my face with my arm, and leaving tiny cuts across the underside of his forearm. Through the gaps in my fingers that was shielding my face, I can see glimmers of the smoke rising from the now extinguished campfire. The second I had escaped the trees and pretty much flung myself into the empty area where my parents had set up a campfire, I immediately emptied my stomach's contents. My vomit was hot and boiling from all the stress I had just inflicted on my body, and it scorched the inside of my throat. I glanced upwards, my vision reduced from the tears and sweat in my eyes, but I could see the outline of my brother standing just a few feet over me. Michael, holy hell, where the hell have you been? That's when I realized something. I had not just escaped. There was no finish line. That thing was still after me, and within seconds, I jumped up to my feet, my legs aching, and my entire body just overheated. Never in my life had I ran as much as that, nowhere near as more than any miles I've run in PE class. I could only muster out a couple words before my voice was cancelled out by the petrifying scream of the creature. It had stopped screaming for a few seconds, just enough for my brother to not get a full listening of it, because it had lost me, but both an extremely exhausted me and my own brother were in its radius. I can remember what I said, as clear as ever. We need to get in the RV right now. My brother told me at a later date that when he heard that screech of whatever was in the forest, he had almost lost it right there. Before I could even blink, he had his arms scooped under his armpits, and he had me dragged into the RV within a span of around 5 seconds. Did it so fast that I was shocked he didn't get a hernia, and to this day, this is the greatest thing he's ever done to me. If he had left me in a panic, I would not be online writing this story. That thing would have burst out of the shadows, wrap an outstretched hand around my ankle, and drag me into the darkness, where we would never been seen again. The booming bang of my brother slamming the RV door and locking it immediately woke both of my parents, but before my father could self-detonate and chew him out for waking them up, their gazes immediately averted to me, who was left a sweating, crying, retching mass on the RV floor. I remember my mother immediately coming to my aid, horrified because, as she would tell me years later, she had never seen me in such a state of absolute disarray before. My father interrogated my brother, unsure what to make of my current state, but believing my brother was behind it. My ears were ringing badly, but I could hear what he was telling him. There's something in the woods. They heard it scream, and it didn't sound like a wild animal. My father showed immediate disbelief, but I remember through choking gasps of air, I assured him that I ran directly into it, and it chased me out of the woods. My parents were mortified upon realization that my brother wasn't lying again, and my father urgently asked what I had seen in the woods. I remember what I said, word for word. It was a person on all fours, with no skin. What came next was a blur. My own body was starting to power down from how much energy I had drained myself, and even though I struggled to stay awake, just in seconds, I felt myself slip out of consciousness. All I remember is my brother frantically telling something to my parents, and my panicking mother scooped me up. I woke up an undetermined time later, and a couple years later, while reciting the story to my brother, he told me that I was out for around 11 hours straight, and I slept dead silent. I remember waking up in the back of the RV on my bed, my dad driving, my mom in the front seat, and my brother on his bed, laying down and playing his Nintendo DS. Everyone was silent, and my brain was flooded so much that it took me hours to remember the events of last night. My brother and I talked just an hour later. I asked him what the actual hell happened just last night, and he told me to not talk about it at all until we got home. I didn't particularly understand what he meant at first, and just a couple hours later, I discovered that our road trip had been cut a day short. However, it would be years until I would understand what truly happened after I lost consciousness. My mother said nothing, while my father always silenced me, telling me he never wanted to speak of it. My brother was the only one who would talk to me about it, but told me he didn't remember what happened after I passed out either, since he fell asleep as well, and wanted to hear it from my father, but he always acted as if it never even seemed to happen. I had my nightmares. They plagued me so bad, but they eventually went away. Some were either me re-experiencing when I was paralyzed in the middle of the forest, listening to the sounds of snapping twigs and distorted groans, while some were me fleeing from that horrific creature that was chasing me, hysterically screaming. After around a few months, the whole thing escaped my mind. It wasn't until somehow, over a decade later, the whole experience reappeared in my mind during a conversation with my brother about past vacations, and that road trip popped up. I remembered talking to him over lunch, and surprisingly, he found the whole thing so mysterious and odd. I asked him a few questions. Some I remember was how long I was gone, and he informed me it was at least over half an hour, and he got extremely worried I had gotten lost. I told him that I did and described my whole episode that was just anchored to place and heard those two noises over and over again. I asked him where he had gotten the whole information of the skin, because I can't find anything like it online, and he told me the same friend who supposedly encountered a skin walker told him. My brother thought they were made up at first, but wanted to amuse me with the story of them on that very night. I asked him why he apparently couldn't hear that thing screech for the first time. He told me that oddly, everything was dead silent, and it wasn't until I lurched free of the forest that he heard that thing's wail. That's when I remembered my most important question, a question I've been trying to think of an answer for years. Josh, when we got into the RV, and I told Dad that it was some messed up creature, what happened after I passed out? My brother froze for a few seconds, looking down at his plate and just chewing. He swallowed his food and finally spoke. Dad told me to lie to you before I woke up. He knew what happened. Mom and I both witnessed it, but they didn't want you to know any details. That whole experience messed you up good for at least a few weeks. You had night terrors, right? Yeah, I did. But what did you see? The rest of the night was silent after that. That thing probably wandered off, or was never able to find us. So I remember we all kinda just fell asleep in our beds. Mom embraced you the whole time, and you were mumbling in your sleep. 4 words. They weren't coherent at first, and I guess only I heard them because Mom and Dad were both asleep by then. I don't have it. That thing yelled at me before it started running at me. This screech of a voice, give it back. I think that's why. My brother picked at his teeth before continuing to talk. That's not all. I remember waking up in the morning. Mom and Dad were outside the RV. Mom was horrified and crying. Dad couldn't look, so I came out. And Mom tried to cover my eyes, but I saw it, nearly through right there. Sheriff came just a couple minutes later. If you're wondering, he was of no help. I stared at him with a combination of curiosity and fright. I felt an overwhelming chill run down my spine, though one that would never compare to the ones I had while I was stuck in the middle of the forest. What did you see? The sides of the RV, even the roof, were covered in reddish-brown splotches, visibly dried and crusted into the RV's paint. My brother winced for a split second, but continued, staring me in the eyes. They had all shape I didn't recognize at first, but seconds before Mom covered my eyes, I could tell that they were handprints. While we slept, that bastard came back and crawled all over the RV. I finished his sentence, because it was looking for me. I don't know what truly lurks in the dark crevices of Earth, but I know now not all of them are feral. Some used to be people like you and me, but they were robbed of everything they had. The very matter that covers their body shields the meat from the outside world, the cold, empty outside world. That's driven me crazy. I remember thinking about how negative my brother was, bringing up all these awful things he's done in the past, how much I despised him prior, yet he saved my life. What if he was the one who went into the forest? What if he was the one who ran out of the forest, out of breath and vomiting? What if I abandoned him? What if he was the one who was dragged into the forest, gone without a trace? I would never, ever see him again. Not me, not our parents, not the friends or teachers or other supervisors he's had that have broken their backs over the years, trying to make him a nicer person. If the chances were different that night, one of us would not be present today. Maybe even both. Yet, there's one thing that still unnerves me about this incident, is that whatever truly that creature was, it's still out there in that dark, silent forest, condemned to walk in animate limbo, searching for not just its ripped away skin and flesh, but something else that was ripped out of it, its soul. I've always been the chubby kid, constantly being teased by my peers for how heavy I was. I never really understood the big deal. I mean, yeah, I'm overweight, but what's that got to do with you? And for that reason I was tormented every day. Standing next to my classmates, it was evident of my size, but when I would go home, well, that's where I would be the smallest. I come from a long line of, let's just say, obese people. Every morning my mother would make her usual for me, and my father pancakes with mountains of sugar and syrup, only to follow up dinner with a meal just as gluttonous. This was an everyday occurrence, and to be honest, I loved it. I mean, what kid doesn't want to eat an endless serving of junk food? It wasn't until my father became ill and started to lose weight did I even fathom the idea that we could be thin, that I could be thinner. For some reason, my father being ill didn't worry my mother. Rather, it was the losing weight part that kept her up at night concerned. She constantly would feed him infinite of amount servings, while rejecting the prescribed medication that was given to him, knowing that it would only suppress his appetite. You have to eat, you have to force, my mother would tell my bedridden father as he gasped for oxygen. I didn't know what to think. I found it odd, but it was my parents, and I figured my mother knew what was best. Perhaps she thought her cooking could nurture my father back to health. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. He passed away. I didn't get to tell him goodbye or even see him. My mother took him away before I had the chance. She told me that she knew he would pass soon, and that she took him to some special home where you don't receive any treatment. Instead, you pass peacefully. At this point, I was entering high school, and I was left completely devastated. All I wanted to do was eat. It made me feel better. My mother did her best to console me in the only way she knew how, in her cooking. I must have ballooned up to at least 300 pounds, something that delighted my mother. As years came and when I only grew more lonely, I had no friends, no girlfriend, no companions of any kind whatsoever, except for my mother. Remember, you have to keep eating. It's the only way. It's how we keep safe. My mother once told me. I was confounded with what she meant, but my appetite only grew, so I followed her advice. As I entered my 30s, a revelation dawned on me in the most profound way, which was, for being an obese person, I was perfectly healthy. I finally had convinced myself that it was time for me to get in shape. The loneliness had inundated my very being, and I knew if I was ever going to be happy, I needed to lose weight. So I went to a doctor for a checkup, something I have never done before. For some reason, my mother never took me to doctors, and the only reason my father had went when first becoming ill was that he had fainted at work, and his employer called for an ambulance. Besides, that time we were a family that never went to get checkups. My face froze with utter bewilderment when the doctor told me I was fit. In fact, he said that I was healthier than most men in their 30s. My mouth gaped open, not understanding how that could be possible. I had a new outlook on life, and I wanted to do whatever it took to shrink down, so I did the typical. I went for runs, reduced my calorie intake. I even flirted with the idea taking steroids, but no matter what I did, I just couldn't lose weight. I would grab at my belly fat and curse at it as if it were some foreign invader attacking me with its presence. And after months of trying, I began to accept the reality that solitude would engulf me for the rest of my life. That's when one of my coworkers gave me the suggestion of surgery. You mean like sewing my stomach shut? I apprehensively asked my coworker. He just stared at me with a hideous smirk on his face. No bro, like get the doctors to suck the fat out of you, he said. I never thought about surgery before. I mean, I always figured one day I would need it, but never did I imagine of losing body fat that way. So I went to see the doctor about surgery, and to my thrill, I was told this was an option. The doctor told me it would be a series of procedures, that they couldn't just take it all out of me at once. So I reluctantly agreed. I called my mother with the revelation of my plan. I needed a comforting voice to reassure me I would be okay. But my mother didn't coddle me. Instead, she scolded me. I told you, you have to eat. It's the only way to stay safe. She told me to my horror. I just needed her to be supportive. What do you mean safe? It's because you, Mom, that I've grown to this size, that I'm miserable, that I'm lonely. I told her as anguish protruded from my weary voice. She remained silent for several seconds, leaving regret simmering on the tip of my tongue for being so aggressive. I tried to keep your father from losing weight. It's his fault. He wanted to lose weight, and that's why he got sick. I couldn't save him after that. My mother told me, then promptly hung up on me. I didn't know what she was talking about, but her words grew concern in me, now thinking if my mother had anything to do with my father's sudden illness. I didn't talk to my mother for months after that. I didn't want anything more to do with her nonsense. So with that, I began my ascent into a life of happiness. The first surgery was an absolute success. Within the first few weeks after the swelling had gone down, visible results were evident. My face looked thinner. I think I could even see a bit of jawline. To say the least, I was jovial at the revelation, and I couldn't wait for my next surgery. By surgery 3, I was down 100 pounds, and it left me feeling ambitious to do whatever it took to lose more weight naturally. I went back to the gym, now delighted to take off my oversized sweater to lift weights. I went on morning runs, and I cut out all the sugar I could from my diet. I guess you could say I was one of those people, the type that makes you roll your eyes whenever you saw a health-conscious person. Surprisingly, this newfound perspective led me into a journey of self-discovery. Now I like to go out and talk to people, no longer encapsulated in my own sorrow. Rather, I was out making friends, and even talking to women. Life was perfect. Whenever I looked in the mirror, I saw the man that I was always meant to be. My face had features, my arms displayed strength, but more importantly, I now smiled. By the time my final surgery arrived, I was down nearly 200 pounds. And if you didn't look close, you would have never thought I was ever overweight. The only thing that remained was my stomach. I still had a bit of gut. The stubborn belly fat just didn't want to melt away. I don't know how to tell you, the doctor said. Whenever a medical professional tells you these words, you can literally feel your heart sink. I was almost sure that whatever words came next was my death sentence. Echoes of my mother telling me not to lose weight danced around in my thoughts. What is it, doc? Tell me. I nervously responded back. A bit of silence grew between the two of us as our eyes remained locked on each other in this critical game of chicken, as if the first to look away loses. "We can't do the last procedure. Well, we don't recommend it, you see." The doctor paused. "We believe that you might have a tumor of some sort underneath that last layer of belly fat. We need to do more tests." And just as I thought my world shattered, memories of my father becoming ill began to make sense. Whatever was happening inside of me must have happened to him. I decided against more tests. I knew what the outcome would be and was so happy I was finally living life to the fullest, so I just ignored the issue that was unraveling inside of my body. I continued exercising along with a nutritional diet. I did everything I was doing before. I even had a girlfriend. She was like me, once overweight, but now thin. I didn't tell her of my possible demise. I figured, why bog her down with my problems? Instead, I showered her in affection. I wanted to build a life, not plan out a death. But to my dismay, that's when the stomach pains began to happen. It was like nothing I've ever experienced. Shooting pains would travel from my gut throughout my body, causing me to erupt into uncontrollable shaking. I did my best to hide it from my girlfriend, but as the weeks came and went, the sudden convulsions I would encounter only became more frequent, and the tumor started to grow. My girlfriend thought I was gaining weight. I needed escape. I needed solace from the city, from my girlfriend. I just needed time to accept my fate, so I went back home to my mom's house. My mother, who I hadn't seen in years, was gleeful at my presence, but her jovial expression only sank after she studied me for several seconds, understanding how thin I had gotten. And with such haste she pulled me into her embrace, sobbing delicately to herself. I didn't know what to think, so I did the only thing I could think of, and that was I held her back and began to cry myself. As usual, she prepared a huge meal for me with all the fixins, and to finish off the gluttonous dinner was a 3-layer chocolate cake. To be honest, after almost a year of eating healthy, tasting my mother's home-cooked food was a pleasure that couldn't be described by words, a sensation of transcendence. And as I swallowed each bite, I could feel tears form on the edges of my eyes as my taste buds became inundated with an ambrosia of flavors. I was home, sitting at the dinner table with my mother as my body slowly digested the pounds of food I had just ingested. We talked about a variety of subjects, but as I told my mother of how exciting my life had become, her eyes only directed their stare at my stomach. She could see how inflated my gut was. She could see the tumor. I crossed my arms, trying to shield my oversized gut from her, not wanting to talk about my illness. But that's when an eruption of pain engulfed my entire body. My stomach pain had returned, and I began to convulse violently in front of my mother, and all she could do was reach for my hand, trying to comfort me. After the seizure had calmed, I could read her eyes. It was the same look that was prevalent when my father was sick, but unlike that time, she now looked defeated. "About your father," she said as my breathing steadily calmed. "We're different. There's something inside of us, and I can't tell you what it is, but it's something that wants to get out. And we have to do whatever it takes to keep it from doing that, because once it's out, many will die." My eyes widened open with utter disbelief. What the hell was my mother telling me? Wait, what? It's a tumor, Mom, just like Dad had. Why do you have to play make-believe? I'm tired of it, okay? Just admit it, I angrily told her. I could see her brow knit down with a bit of frustration, and her tender grip transformed into a tight one. "You have to gain weight. That's the only way we can keep it from coming out. It's not too late, my son," she told me as tears cascaded down her face. I pulled my hand away. I was tired of her nonsense, of her stories. And with that, I stormed out of her house and headed home. Seeing my mother was the refreshing sensation. I needed to go back to the doctor for help. After all, my mother keeping me from medical treatment all these years has got me to where I am now. Entering my home, I called out for my girlfriend, ready to tell her the truth about my illness, how I was going to get treatment, that I didn't want to hide it anymore. At this point, my tumor had grown to a hideous size, and I found it difficult to breathe. But I did my best to shout out for my girlfriend. "Babe, I'm home. Where are you? We need to talk." I gasped out loud with all the remaining strength I had. I could hear her soft voice calling back out to me as her footsteps became more near. And that's when the pain once again returned. This time it was different. It was more excruciating. My body began to tremble, and I grabbed at my stomach, trying to massage it, hoping this episode would pass quickly. But to my horror, it only got worse. I fell to the floor as screams of pain escaped my mouth. My stomach, it was expanding almost as if it was going to explode. I squirmed on the floor, sweat drenching my body as froth began flowing out of my mouth. I clawed at my stomach, wanting the pain to stop. And that's when I heard the shrieks of trepidation coming from my girlfriend. She rushed to my side, trying to console me as her mind adjusted to what was happening. And that's when my stomach burst open. My stomach had completely exploded. Blood and intestines showered my hardwood floors, and my cries cautiously became whimpers as I could feel my vision become blurry. I could hear the screams of terror coming from my girlfriend. And that's when a hideous arm protruded from my gaping stomach. It was a grotesque thing. Its skin looked like it had scales. The edge of its fingertips revealed black pointy claws. I laid weak and somber. I really couldn't move. I couldn't do anything other than keeping my gaze on that horrid figure that was coming out of me, and soon I saw the head. The beast was more devilish than anything I could have ever imagined. It had 4 eyes, and its teeth were endless. I couldn't make sense of what I was witnessing. And that's when my girlfriend let out a gasp of distraught, and I had utterly forgotten that she was there. And that's when that demon pounced on her, and it began to eat her. I could hear her screams for help, and my body laid still. I couldn't save her. All I could do was listen to her dreadful final whimpers of life. Once the creature was done, we locked eyes, and I gulped, accepting the situation for what it was, that I was going to die. To my surprise, that monster sniffed me, its face caressing mine, bloody slime seeping all over me, all while its stench invaded my senses. And all I could do was shut my eyes tightly, but nothing ever happened. Several minutes had passed, and I opened my eyes, realizing the creature was gone. The living room lay desolate, and still, it was just me alone in a puddle of blood. I don't know where that thing went. I'm starting to question my own sanity. But the blood is there, I know it's real. And my stomach seems to be closing on its own, like a cocoon enclosing itself. I don't seem to be dying. In fact, I feel as if a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. Visions of a brighter future somehow penetrate into my mind. I honestly don't know what to think. But one thing is for sure, I truly wish I had listened to my mother. I should have never lost weight. When I was a boy, me and my friends got lost, or so that is the official story. What really happened occurred when we were on a hike through the Redwood National Park and decided to stray from the trail. There we discovered the truth about the national parks and the real reason people go missing in them. Perhaps I am getting ahead of myself and should start by telling you my tale. Then perhaps you will listen to my warnings. So here it is, my story. August 13th, 1998. It was a scorching hot summer's day. I was 12 years old and already thought I knew everything about the world, as you do when you are young, and so full of surety. Oak-rich earthy smells perfumed the air, and grand wooden giants loomed over from all sides of the path. They were the moss-coated sentries of the Redwood National Park. Come on guys, not too much further, about another 30 minutes until we reach the campsite. Our scout leader Charlton exclaimed. He's been saying that for the last hour, groaned Tyler, the more outspoken and cheeky of my friends. Why did you come on the hike if you were just going to moan? Simon countered, his words forever disapproving of Tyler. Do you guys think we can stop for a minute? Ethan wheezed, being an asthmatic, the youngest and smallest of the group. The walk had knocked the stuffing out of the 11-year-old. Don't dawdle or stop, stick to the path. Those fences and signs are there for a reason, Scout Leader Charlton added as he pointed over to the right. He could well have said more, but we were not paying attention. We were your average 12 and 11-year-olds. When someone said don't, we ignored it. And despite the scout leader telling us not to stop or dawdle, I told the others we should wait a moment so Ethan could have a breather. It didn't take much convincing from Tyler that it would be far more exciting if we went exploring, rather than continue hiking with the rest of the squares, especially if the places we were exploring were those cordoned off and forbidden by our scout leader. Even Simon, the more reserved and mature one of the group, was eager to follow Tyler as he rushed over to the cordoned off area. This was a huge mistake, and obviously, as an adult, I look back and know how stupid and dangerous that was, but when you are young, you think you're invincible. We should have heeded the signs that warned to stay on the path. We should have listened to our scout leader's words, but he was now far ahead of us, and we had already sneaked away from the safety of the troop. Our foolish choices only continued as we slipped under the fence that cordoned off the area ahead. We were young idiots, that's what we were. We ignored all the warnings, laughed, and scoffed at the idea of getting lost or becoming the meal of a black bear. And at first we felt vindicated, for our little adventure started off fine, no harm or cause for concern. As we rambled through the undergrowth and played hide and seek around the redwood towers, we skipped stones across a small creek, saw a wild deer before something scared her off. We even found a coyote strung up in a tree, which Tyler was quick to claim was the work of the Jersey Devil, until Simon pointed out that not only were we not in the Jersey Pine Barrens, but it was also far more likely a mountain lion dragged it up there to avoid being disturbed. I think we should probably head back, I said, feeling a little tired and starting to entertain the thought that we may have made a mistake, wandering so far away from the group. Agreeing, we retraced our steps, but as we walked, we came across an interesting scene. What we had discovered was a campsite, long since abandoned, and smothered by layers of forest debris. The tents looked as though they had been ravaged by claws, but Simon, the more sensible of us, claimed it was just exposure to the elements and time that had tore through the fabric and dilapidated the site. Still, it didn't stop us from coming up with all sorts of scary backstories for the moss-shrouded sleeping bags and broken lanterns. Tyler warned everyone it could be a Bigfoot, but we just laughed. Everyone knows Bigfoot was a myth. Ethan, the more quieter of our group, pointed out that the tearing seemed to travel as sets of vibe, as though Freddy Krueger with his razor fingers had carved through the material himself. Ethan, I'm telling you, it's just what happens when these things are left out here at the mercy of wind, rain, storms, Simon assured us. But why were they left here? I mean, they've clearly dug out a fire pit, spent the time to set the site up, and then they just abandoned it, Ethan pointed out, causing us all to get a little quieter. I think we should probably head back, I suggested. This time my words were more urgent than before. The others didn't say that they too were feeling uneasy, but I could tell they were just as nervous as I. Ethan was right, it was odd for all this stuff to be left here, almost as if they had fled in a panic, or worse, fell foul of something hungry. Marching on through the scrub and endless wooden maze, we all began to worry that we had ventured too long and too far from the trail. I could have sworn it was just a few meters to the right, Simon insisted as he peered from behind his glasses. Evidently it isn't though, is it, Simon? Tyler snapped, with his disposition becoming more and more agitated with each passing moment. Guys, you're not going to believe this, Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly as he peeled back a large shrub. There before us was the same abandoned campsite we had left almost an hour ago. That's not possible. We've been walking for 40 minutes straight, I gasped, pointing to my watch, but the hands began to spiral. I think your watch is broken, Simon insisted, trying his best to remain rational. Great, this is just perfect. We've been walking in a circle, Tyler yelled. We're lost, aren't we? Stammered Ethan, his hands clutching each other as he paced around in an anxious manner. Guys, calm down, I spoke, but my words did nothing to slow the rising panic in us all. Help, help, is anyone there? Tyler called out. Suddenly Simon's hand smothered Tyler's mouth as he emitted a low hush. Stop it. Do you want to attract every grizzly, black bear, and mountain lion for miles around? Simon hushed. We all got quiet, but it wasn't just us who ceased making noise. The whole forest around us fell silent. Even the normal creaking of trees and whistle of wind disappeared, and it appeared that the animals had muted themselves too, for not a bird or cicada could be heard. Guys, I don't want to be that guy, but something isn't right here, I suggested. John's right. I mean, we've all read about those people who go missing in national parks. They step off the trail or path for just a minute, and then they're never seen again, Tyler declared. Oh, stop it. Next you'll be suggesting aliens abducted them. Simon scoffed. No, Tyler's right. Remember the Kennar family in 1982? They came up here and were never seen again. And what about those kids who went camping a few years back? They got lost and ended up killed by a grizzly. It could happen to us, shouted Ethan. Be quiet, I heard something, I snapped. Looking around, I scanned the bark and branches around us, expecting in my heart that I'd see nothing. My eyes landed on a tree trunk, tall and towering only a few meters away from us. Upon its surface was what at first I thought was a yellow and black orb weaver. Shock rippled through me as a bald yellow skinned head peeked slightly from behind the tree and revealed that what I had thought was a spider was actually a hand clutching at the wood. "We have to go now," I said, trying my best not to scream or shout, and without giving them any indication of what I had seen, I sprinted through the forest. Following close behind me, the others kept pace, but I didn't tell them still. I wished to reserve that knowledge until I was sure we had put enough space between us and whatever it was. Fear rushed through my feet, and 10 minutes became 20 and 30, but still we ran. All the while, I ignored their demands to know what I had seen and why we were running. After 30 minutes of running in the opposite direction to that thing, we stopped to take a breather. We rested against one of the redwood towers that only earlier we had been playing hide and seek behind. It was there I told them, for I could no longer refuse to answer their questions. "What was it? What did you see?" Tyler panted frantically. "A person, I think," I said, causing Ethan to take a nervous gulp of his inhaler. "Oh, don't you start too," the rational Simon replied. "No, I think it was a person in yellow and black paint or something," I asserted, trying my best to not freak them out. "Like camo?" Tyler questioned, his eyes wide with worry. "Yellow camo? That's a bit redundant." Simon laughed. "I know what I saw, Simon," I snapped, letting my fear and agitation get the better of me. "What were they doing, this person you saw?" Ethan quivered. "It looked like they were watching us. They were peeking from behind the tree," I answered. Shivers ran through us all, despite the humidity and the heat. I think all our bloods ran cold after I spoke those words. We sat against that redwood for a long pause, to gather ourselves, to calm our worries. Maybe Simon was right to laugh at me. Perhaps it was a hallucination brought on by the heat. That made sense, I thought. Still, it didn't explain the lack of animals, the absence of sound, and encroaching thick old air of the forest which continued to become heavier with each minute we spent there. Darkness began to creep in through the national park, though admittedly it was difficult to tell the time of day when the canopy above eclipsed the sun almost entirely, and my watch was malfunctioning. "We need to make camp," I suggested. "Are you mad? You've just told us some creep in camo was watching us from behind a tree," countered Tyler. "No, he's right. If we just continue on, wandering aimlessly in the dark, we run the risk of getting even more lost. And if there is someone following us, then wouldn't it be better if we are walking around blind to our surroundings?" Simon said. "Guys," Ethan exclaimed, his voice hushed and shaking. We all looked over and saw what had unnerved him. With his hand shaking, his pointed finger fell upon the site of the same abandoned campsite we had found and fled earlier. "This can't be happening. This can't be happening." Tyler rambled his words and pace quickening into panicked steps. "We have to stay calm. There is a perfectly rational explanation," Simon stated, but even he didn't seem to believe his own words. "Oh, shut up, Simon. We just ran for 30 minutes straight, in a straight line. How exactly did we end up back here?" Tyler thundered, his voice ripping apart all the surety in Simon's posture. "I," stumbled Simon. For once our group's skeptic fell short of answers, and his disbelief was replaced with unease. "I don't know what's happening, but I do know arguing and running around like headless chickens isn't going to help," I declared. "Use your compass," Simon suggested, but as I brought the compass out from my pocket, I could already see it wasn't going to help, for the arrow on my compass was broken, bewitched, or magnetized. It would spin wildly, then stop and point towards the abandoned camp, then spin again, and stop on the camp once more. Over and over it did this, until eventually, I just said it was broken. I didn't tell them what was happening, choosing to spare them of the confusion and fear that I was feeling. "It's busted," I told them. "Great, no way to tell the time, no way to tell which direction we are heading, and we seem to be walking in a circle." Tyler nervously laughed, his usual sarcastic and clowning humor drowning beneath waves of worry. Looking around us, I could see no sign of the strange figure who I had glimpsed earlier, but I had noticed the sun was setting. "It's going to get dark soon. We need to be sensible. We should make camp here tonight And tomorrow we'll continue on trying to find a way out of here, I added, trying to remain a clear and level-headed leader, for I could see the others were racked with anxiety and needed some kind of authority to make them feel safe. Reluctantly, the others agreed. We'd make camp at the abandoned site, and I assured them that whatever I saw was probably long gone now. So we set out to prepare ourselves for the night ahead. We already had canteens filled with water, but we needed food and warmth. Simon, being the more knowledgeable of us, picked berries that he knew weren't poisonous, whilst Tyler and I set up a fire in the already dug out fire pit. Ethan revealed a few chocolate bars he had on him, and together with our berries we staved off our hunger as the evenings. Twilight rolled in. In the gloom, we sat around our warming fire. Tyler, you know those people who went missing in the national parks? Did they ever find any of them? Ethan wheezed. Sure, some of them. Tyler spat, without concern for Ethan's nerves. Shrinking and looking almost haunted, Ethan's dread was immediately apparent, and even Tyler tried to calm him. Don't think about that though, Ethan, we're going to be fine. Tyler reassured, unconvincingly. What time is it, Simon? I asked, having noticed him staring intensely at his watch. It's saying 4 p.m., but that can't be right. Simon stuttered. 4 p.m., it's pitch black. I'd get that watch sent back to the shopmate. You've been ripped off. Tyler joked. It's not the watch, it's this place. Ethan whimpered. Guys, I can't bear this anymore. I just can't. He yelled as he bounded up from the log on which he was sat. Frantically, Ethan stormed around the campsite and cupped his hands over his mouth. Please, can anyone hear us? Ethan called out into the night, his words tearful and afraid. Ethan, calm down. I told him. Ethan, shut up before something hears you. Simon snapped, his collected and intelligent manner diminished by concern for his own safety. Help us. Please, we need help. Ethan screamed out, causing Tyler and Simon to leap up to silence him. Suddenly there was a cracking of a twig, and we all stopped and looked towards the direction. Our sights delved into the dark, imagining black bears, mountain lions, and all manner of starving beasts, but nothing was there. Just the endless, empty, unflinching abyss. Turning back round, we looked at Ethan, who was exhausted, defeated, and tearful. I just wanted to go home, he wept. Down from the trees, yellow carapace-clad arms descended upon Ethan's head, their claws grasping onto either side of his face, and twisted sharply, causing a loud snap to sound out. Terror streaked through us, and we all hurled ourselves back as our friend's small, lifeless body was hoisted up through the branches and into the canopy. What the hell was that? Tyler screamed as he fell away from the area where Ethan had been standing. Leaves and twigs fell from rustling canopy above, and down minutes later an arm, severed and bloody, fell through a cloud of leaves and landed in front of us. Run, I yelled. Simon and Tyler screamed and followed in my wake, fleeing into the night. We were less afraid of bears, wolves, and bobcats, and more afraid of becoming prey to whatever that thing in the trees was. In our fright we fled with no concern for our direction, nor what lay ahead, and eventually, our blind sprint led us over the top of a shallow dip. All three of us tumbled to the ground and lay there panting, terrified and utterly powerless. This isn't real. This has to be some sort of hallucination. Yeah, that's it. The berries. It must have been the berries, Simon said, trying to rationalize what we had witnessed. Simon, it's real. We all just saw Ethan's neck go full-on exorcist twist, and we all saw one of his arms come falling down from the trees like a chewed-up twig. So stop with the rationalizing crap, Tyler shouted as he jumped to his feet. Shut up, Tyler. This is all your fault. I don't know why I let you guys talk me into leaving the group, Simon yelled back, his words being followed by him shoving Tyler against a redwood. With fists raised, they were ready to take their fears out on each other, but before they could brawl, my voice cut through their ridiculousness. Quiet, the pair of you, I hissed, trying not to raise my voice too high. Maybe it's gone, Simon suggested, with hopefully naivety. Erupting out of the soil beneath his feet, a tall, slender humanoid emerged. It appeared so quickly that none of us got a good look at it, nor did we have time to stop it from snatching up Simon and flying off through the canopy on giant buzzing wings. Icarus would have been envious of the wings that thing bore, for its flight was swifter than any bird or bug, and its speed was sharp and lethal. Simon stood no chance against that thing as it whisked him off his feet and dragged him into the deep of the redwood maze. Calling back like deathly echoes, his voice screamed and begged for us to help, but we couldn't. And eventually his futile pleading faded into the deafening silence of the national park. "We've got to go, man. We've got to go now. I need to get out of here," Tyler howled as he ran into the darkness, abandoning me. "Tyler, no, wait, don't leave me," I implored, but he was deaf to my words. Alone in the dark, I walked, expecting to fall prey to the monstrous thing in the trees at any moment. However, it appeared that it was not yet finished playing. What sick game it was playing, for the shrubbery that lay ahead of me looked all too familiar. Pushing its leaves aside, I found the campsite. The fire we had made was still burning bright, and everything was as we had left it. There was only one thing missing, Ethan's arm. In that moment, I resolved to survive, despite whatever it was that was hunting us. Someone had to get out of here and warn others of the winged predator. I know now this was just adrenaline kicking in, the good old fight or flight, trying to assist me in my dire situation. Tearing off some of the fabric from the tent, I bound a thick branch in it and doused it in some oil from a lantern, which had been left alongside all the other camping gear. Opting for the long and dangerous road into the veil of shadows around me, I began to walk, my only company, the warm glow of my light. Every snap of a branch, every crunch of leaves beneath my feet, I imagined was that thing, coming back to finish what it had started. Yet, despite my feet aching, I continued, refusing to acknowledge each blister that formed and burst within my shoes. Then, as if by chance, the illumination from my torch shone upon a tree and revealed a strange carved marking. It sort of looked like a pixie or a fairy, and though I was confused on what it might mean, maybe this was some sort of trail marker my ignorant younger mind conceived, I figured that it had to have been carved by human hands so as to guide lost wanderers to safety. Following the carvings, I worked my way through the redwoods, weaving in and out of their intimidating towering trunks. Eventually, after what felt like eternity, I found a clearing and rushed in. I expected to find my scout leader and the others, but this was not the case, for this was not the clearing in which my scout troop had set up camp. No, this was somewhere else. Anomalously, the clearing did not have a carpet of dry soil and dead leaves like the rest of the park. Instead, it was a circular expanse of green grass littered with tents, backpacks, gasoline cans, and all manner of camping equipment. I torchlight the secrets of the clearing were revealed, for all around me were old boots, trainers, caps, and sleeping bags, and sticking out of the discarded clothing were bones and skulls, all of which looked human and ranged in size and shape. At first I imagined this was a graveyard of sorts, a killing field maybe, but then I realized it wasn't a burial site. It was worse than that. It was a larder. My heart sank as it sank in that the markings I had followed of winged figures were clearly leading me here, and not to safety, and it was obvious now that it wasn't human hands that had carved the markings. Abruptly, my inspection of the surroundings came to halt as a disturbing sound drew my attention to the center of the clearing. The noise was ghastly, a sort of chewing and grating sound that gargled and glugged with each bite. Accompanying the horrid noise was a feeble moaning, low and dim, the noise of a trapped or dying animal. With my orange flame, I approached the center of the clearing, wandering through the field of lost campers and corpses, until I made it to the middle where a large, an old oak tree stood, a solitary specimen of its kind. Edging round the corner of the tree, I followed the noise, with dread shivering up my spine and rattling my bones. Each step I took caused my instincts to scream at me to run in the opposite directions, yet something else drew me on. I should have listened to my instinct, because horror tore through my body, soldering my feet to the ground as I glimpsed the sight ahead. Speechless and shocked, I opened my mouth to scream as the amber-colored light revealed all. Before me was Tyler, trapped in the mantis grip of a yellow-skinned humanoid. Her arms were locked around his crumpled body as she, crouching and hunched over him, gorged herself upon his flesh, splitting apart and segmenting. Her face moved like the rasping mandibles of an insect, whilst her gray translucent teeth raked sinew and meat from the nape of his neck. "John," Tyler whimpered, his broken form slouched over and limp. "Let him go," I yelled, thrusting the torch towards her. She hissed as she fell out of her crouched position and fluttered up into the air, disappearing into the black for a moment. Desperate to help him, I reached over to Tyler, but as I looked down, I saw she had already hollowed out his back, exposing his spine. However, the most gruesome part was seeing that there wasn't much else left of his interior, and yet his heart continued to heat, and his empty eyes begged for life. Holding back my vomit, I fell away from the sight and swerved around in all directions, looking out for the monstrous creature whose buzzing wings were the only sound I could hear. "Why are you doing this?" I cried out. "This place is ours, meat, sacred to us. All that step within its boundaries are food," she chirped, her voice resembling the sound crickets make. Out of the shadows, she emerged, her wicked beauty a visage of Titania. I stared at her, lacking the words or the courage to speak. Before my eyes, I watched as her yellow plates and raking fangs retracted back into place, forming a face that resembled a human, complete with womanly black bow lips. "What are you?" I asked, but I needn't, for what she was clear. "Old, older than the dirt beneath your toes, hungrier than any beast. I am the reason men feared the woods and the dark," she replied, her bald, hairless head twisting and tilting with each word, almost as if she were a curious animal inspecting her prey. "You killed my friends," I shouted. "I've killed thousands of meat, as have my sisters elsewhere." She hissed back immediately, as if aghast and offended by my disapproval. "Sisters," I stuttered, my worried tongue stumbling over the question. "Fret not, they know that this wood is mine, and all within it is mine. They would never step into my domain, just as I would not step into theirs," she chittered, her voice becoming ever more unsettling with each sentence she spoke. I stepped away, but she hovered closer, approaching with a slow and silent glide, though she was human-like in shape, imitating a naked feminine form with breasts and an hourglass waist. This was a hollow charade, for her skin was covered in countless layers of yellow exoskeletal plating, sheathed in the carapace of a wasp. She bore black stripes, as well as other stranger markings across her person, and her features were sculpted with a venomous cruelty. "You are the first living man to step into my sacred grove in centuries. Once men came here, seeking help, seeking a truce and aid. They made a deal that they would leave me be in the promise of prosperity and conquest," she said as she caressed the oak tree with her spidery black and yellow claws. "A bargain was struck. This is my land. It shall remain so, and I shall remain undisturbed, secret and safe. No man shall enter, no man shall burn or log, and any man who steps within my borders is meat," she hissed as her Vespidi wings, black and transparent, carried her closer. Her eyes, those big black compound eyes, were the worst. They were fragmented like a fly's, but they were empty of any mercy or compassion. Instead, they were filled with an ageless, ancient hunger. "Does the meat like what it sees? Does it want me to lay my kiss upon it?" she asked, her strange voice scuttling through the air and infesting my ears. "No," I stammered, backing up slowly and avoiding the enchanting enthrallment of her voice. A paralyzing poison, her speech was like the black speech of Queen Mab, or the mischievous spellbinding calls of Puck. It seeped into my every thought. "Am I not beautiful? Am I not the lady of the wood? Come be with me. Let me embrace you. Let me lay my kiss upon you," she whispered, her words pulling and tugging at me. "I think I'm just going to leave now." I resisted. "Leave? No, no, no. I've not yet had my fill," she roared, leaping through the air. Those wasp-like wings of hers swept through the wind with razor-sharp speed, torpedoing her entire body towards me, her claws and hungry jaws ready to sink into my soft human skin. It was only by a miracle that I ducked and avoided her grasp at the last minute. However, in my panic, I failed to see what was around me and tripped over the faceless body of my friend Simon. I screamed and rolled away, scrambling towards the oak tree at the center of the clearing. Looking around in a panic, I could no longer see my flying assailant. "I can taste your fear. It salts the skin and makes the meat taste so sweet." Her voice dribbled and taunted from all directions. A globule of drool splashed upon my shoulder and ran down my scout uniform. Breathless and terrified, I forced myself to edge my eyes upward to the sight I already knew awaited me. Above, crawling upside down on the bark of the tree, was the predatory female, her wings folded back and vibrating with excitement. "Come here, mate," she screeched, as her bullets split wide and revealed her endless rows of gray fangs. In my panic, I swung my torch in front of myself, and though I missed her face, the flames caught the branches of the oak and set it alight. Unnaturally, the fire spread quickly, slithering across the skeletal leafless bark and branches of the tree, causing it to groan and cry out like no tree should. "What have you done, stupid meat?" a woman wailed as she swatted the torch from my hands, causing it to land into a collection of discarded tents and a propane tank. An explosion ripped through her campsite graveyard, and swiftly rivers of flame tore through the larder. "You wretch, you horrible little wretch. I will peel the face from your head. I will eat you slow, from the feet up," she screamed as she flew above the walls of yellow and red haze. With a quaking stomp, she fell from the sky and landed in front of me. I was weaponless, unprotected, and without escape. Victoriously, she scrambled towards me, buzzing and rumbling across the burning expanse like a fly drenched in toxic bug spray. I, on the other hand, retreated, tripping and stumbling over decades of bones and discarded clothing as I tried to find the means to escape my predatory pursuer. As if by chance, my eyes caught sight of a red metal canister. Praying to whichever god would hear, I begged that the canister held some gasoline. But before I could check if it was full or not, she leaped through embers behind me. There was no time left. I had to defend myself. Picking up the gas can, I tossed it right at her and watched as the liquid spilled across her chitinous armor and ignited with a wild fury. In an instant, she caught flame, and the blaze entwined her female silhouette in a blistering heat. Screams and roars of anguish sounded out, and the whole forest shook with terror as curses and languages I had never heard bounded out from the female as she scuttled across the scorched grove. I didn't stay to watch her burn and make sure the job was done. I ran, falling into mires and tumbling down hills. On I fled, fearing that behind every trunk and tree there she'd be. Every thought in my head was worry for her and her sisters. So I sprinted, galloping for days, stopping only to slurp some water from the occasional creek or stream. Time passed, but still I continued to ignore my aching hunger, the exhaustion, and the pain. Bleeding, bruised and covered in mud, I stumbled on, and finally, when I could walk no further, I fell through a bush and into a campsite. Barely conscious, I watched as our scout leader rushed over, with the rest of the troop following behind. Then it all went black. Next thing I remember was waking up a day later in hospital. I tried to tell my scout leader that I had been lost for days. I spoke of how the others fell prey to the lady in the woods, but he didn't believe me, and what he said next left me beyond bewildered. "John, your story doesn't make sense. You weren't missing or lost for days, not even hours. It was only 30 minutes at most since we lost track of you guys. And then just as we were about to inform the park rangers, you fell into the camp." My scout leader stated, "That's not possible. It was night, and then day, and night again. I ran for days. I'm not crazy," I screeched, but looking back I suppose that didn't help my case. "It is strange. The doctors were convinced you were of pretty much the same. They said you looked like someone who had spent a week out in the wilderness, malnourished, starving even. But you hadn't," he replied, almost leaning towards believing me. Then they appeared, a bunch of men dressed like park rangers, which they claimed to be, but once they started speaking I wasn't so sure. "I'm sorry to tell you this young man, your friends, well, they fell victim to a bear attack, most likely a grizzly bear. You're lucky to be alive," one of the men said in a cold robotic tone. No, it was her," I yelled. "That part is cordoned off for a reason. It's dangerous, full of bears, and you would do well to stick to the path in the future." The unflinching and inhuman ranger declared. "What about the fire?" "I set fire to her in her lair. Surely you've seen that, or at least the smoke from it," I claimed, but this too did nothing to convince them of my sincerity. "Son, there was no fire, no lady of the wood, just a bunch of boys who got lost and unfortunately crossed paths with a hungry bear," one of the men said, his words pressing, and not so much a statement, but rather a threat. That was the last thing they said, and I never saw them again, though I suspected they were always watching or listening, just to check that I never revealed the truth. Not the truth that there is monsters, no, the truth that the Lady of the Wood revealed. She claimed this land of ours was won and given through a deal with her and her kind. a deal which was cemented on the promise of secrecy and protection of herself and her sisters. I imagined that those in charge, those in power, would do anything to ensure that secret never came to light, and that the bargain remained intact, out of fear that what was given would be taken away. With that in mind, I chose to remain silent for most of my life, until now, that is. Too many people have died because of my silence, so now I'm speaking out. If you are reading this and have any plans on visiting a national park in the future, then please, please remember, stick to the path. Do not stray from the trail. Do not dawdle. There is a reason why we were afraid of the dark and the forests, for the woods of the world are ancient and wild, and they conceal a wicked truth. There are ravenous things out there. If I hadn't drunk an entire gallon of tea back at the hotel, maybe none of this would have happened. Well, maybe if we hadn't gotten kicked out of the hotel, none of this would have happened. It had been just the two of us in the small car, but with the animosity heavy on the air, it felt overcrowded. I don't know what had been worse, the hour of arguing, the 2 hours of silence afterwards, or the burgeoning realization that maybe I didn't know him as well as I thought I did. I studied him out of the corner of my eye. We'd been together for several months, but the recent experience left me wondering if I had ever even met the real Brian, who he truly was on the inside. It had been our very first trip together. We'd saved up for one of those super fancy hotels and had been having a great time until, of course, Brian decided to attempt a 5-finger discount in the jewelry store in the lobby. He told me when we first started dating that he'd had some run-ins with the law in the past when he was young, and that was the only way to put food on the table, and I'd understood. But this wasn't the same. It wasn't for survival, it was just greed. We'd both spent the rest of our vacation money, and then some, paying for that $1,800 watch so no charges would be pressed. They still kicked us out. I don't blame them. Asking him to stop at the next place we came across was the first thing I'd said to him in hours, and he nodded, solemnly. My discomfort was escalating to the point where I was considering asking him to pull over on the side of the road. Rain be damned, when we saw the dim sign flickering in the distance. The small store was out of place on the quiet, tree-lined mountain road. We'd been deep in a tunnel of trees, and hadn't seen so much of a hint of the lights in the distance. It seemed to just appear into view as we went around the bend. I didn't recall seeing it on the way to the hotel, so it was a pleasant surprise. I felt a flood of relief wash over me. It stuck out in the otherwise beautiful mountain landscape. Windows, though dirty that the light inside barely reached us through them. Several letters on the sign lit up in such a way that the only word we could even see was a blood-red mark flickering. Any relief I'd managed to feel was short-lived. When we walked in, we both froze as we took in the interior. I instantly wished we'd just stopped by the side of the road after all. I looked at Brian, and could tell he felt it too. He was fiddling with his new watch, and took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, and put them back on, as if that would make what he was seeing make more sense. There were no other customers, no employees visible, it was just the two of us. Ceiling tiles hung askew, and the floor was filthy. We had to step over a drain in the floor with grimy stains circling it to walk in. If it weren't for the lights, gentle hum of the AC, and grinding sounds floating from down the long hallway at the back, I'd have thought the place was abandoned. It was humid inside, and the smell coming from the old coolers that lined the back walls hit me as soon as we walked in. It reminded me of the summer my dad had decided to dabble in taxidermy in our basement. The slight hint of rot that lingered on the damp air indicated poorly done taxidermy at that. As I darted towards the back towards the restroom sign, a placard dangling off it caught my eye, informed me the restroom was for paying customers only. I quickly perused the shelves for something to buy. The aisles were tall, nearly to the ceiling, and despite the store being somewhat small, I felt the panicked sense of being cornered and trapped in an endless maze, at risk of becoming lost in there forever. The food on the shelves resembled nothing like the usual chips and candy these types of stores carried. There were rows upon rows of soft-looking mystery items in plastic wrap. Some of them leaked a red-brown residue down the shelves. None of it looked remotely appealing. I passed by a section with a stained placard that said handcrafted from local artists that was filled with eclectic items, none of which seemed to go together. There were torn shirts with random logos, nothing related to the town or area we were in, stained with mud, grass, and God knows what else. Dried ropey things formed small, and delicate sculptures of animals unlike any I'd seen before. I reached for a bracelet with intricately carved white beads, but nearly dropped it when I realized the band was made up of woven human hair. It left a residue on my hand, and I noticed then that the same sour rot smell was coming from the collection of items, too. I opted for a flat and lukewarm Dr. Pepper instead, and placed two $2 coins on the glass counter in front of the hand scrawled "Shoplifters will be processed" sign near the register. I figured I misread it. After all, it looked like it had been written by a hand unused to holding a pen. Brian had grabbed an armful of those unnerving plastic wrapped packages, but hovered at the counter a bit too long. I could hear the scrape of him retrieving the coins on the glass, the sound of him dropping them into his pocket. He gave me a pointed stare as he did so. I sighed, so tired of arguing that I just walked away from him and down the hallway. I figured I'd pay after he got back in the car. No sooner had I closed the door to the women's room behind me than I could hear him talking to someone. His voice rose until he was nearly yelling, mortified and trying to delay being involved in another incident. That day, I splashed water on my face while trying to drown out what appeared to be a one-sided argument. I kept trying to wash the grimy feeling that had lingered on my hands after picking up the bracelet, but no matter how I scrubbed, I couldn't get it off. It kept getting worse. I felt nauseous when I realized the greasy residue was coming from the pale yellow bar of soap. I decided I'd scrub my hands raw at our next stop and stepped out into the hall and back to the store. Brian wasn't there. I called out for him, but all I heard in answer was that same vague whirring and drilling sound coming from further down the long hallway. I doubled back to the car, but found it empty. I circled the store, my frustration turning to panic as I shouted his name and still got no response. I called his phone. It just rang, and rang before going to voicemail. The car was locked, and he had the keys. I couldn't help but feel nervous, standing out there in the rain. They were still in the middle of the deep woods, and with clouds obscuring the light of the moon and stars, the area was blanketed in darkness. I reluctantly headed back inside. Somehow, the smell had managed to become even worse. I gagged when the wet, disgusting air hit my nose again. It was so strong I could nearly taste it, putrid on my tongue. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was always someone just behind me as I walked quickly through the tall aisles, but whenever I looked over my shoulder, there was never anything there. I called his phone, wondering how I'd managed to lose him in such a small store. When I finally heard it ringing, it was echoing from down that long hallway. As I headed towards it, I heard someone moving on the other side of the floor-to-ceiling aisle, placing something onto the shelf with a sickening wet thud before weaving lightly through the aisles behind me. Brian, I called out softly, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, trying to disguise my fear. I knew it wasn't him. I don't know how, but I knew it. Have you ever had the feeling that if you look closely enough at something, if you truly see it, you'll never be able to close your eyes again without it haunting you? That feeling of being in close proximity to something that your fragile mind was never meant to know existed. I forced myself to turn around anyways. Once again, whoever or whatever had been there was gone by the time I rounded the aisle, but I heard a gentle clinking sound and saw a trail of red-pink droplets. I followed it back to that section, handcrafted from local artists. There was something new hanging from a hook near the shelves. Wet, glistening strips dangled from along what looked to be a curved bone with bits of gristle still attached. From one of them hung an expensive men's wristwatch. Another was tied around a shattered, thick glasses lens. Yet another sagged under the weight of car keys. They gently swayed with the motion of having been recently placed. Fluid continued to drip from the still wet viscera and mingled with the mud on my shoes. Shoplifters will be processed. I didn't need to see the items down the other aisles to figure out what I was looking at. What must have happened? I could already tell that we'd never have another argument, ever again. I heard a door open, and close in the back, soft footsteps approaching from down the hallway. I realized that in my distraction, I'd forgotten to put money back on the counter. I choked up, but knew there was nothing I could do for him. So, I tossed the first bills I found in my purse onto the floor, frantically untangled the car keys, and in shock, I drove myself the remaining 4-hour drive home. Every so often, along the quiet country roads, those I could have sworn were empty on the drive up, I'd see that grimy building, the sign, marked flashing in the distance. I didn't stop once. I've been home for a week now. A few nights ago, something triggered a motion alert on my video doorbell, but there was no one there when I checked the footage. The next morning, I found a cardboard box on my porch with no stamp or return address, and it was a torn t-shirt and several of those now familiar wrapped packages, putrid fluid leaking out of them through the bottom of the soggy cardboard. I've received a similar box every night since. I don't know if it's meant as a threat or if due to some sort of twisted interpretation, I'm now a paying customer. He's slowly being returned to me. Either way, it turns out that I've gotten to see who Brian was on the inside, after all. I think most of us have heard the phrase, April showers bring May flowers. Where I live, we tend to get the bigger storms near the end of the summer instead of in the spring. The past 3 weeks have been bouts of scorching hot days, then large storms rolling through. There had only been one large storm in the spring. Every time I hear thunder rolling off in the distance, I'm mentally back to that spring day. I won't ever be able to forget that storm for as long as I live, and I need to hide away on stormy days so the memories don't fully take over. Last night a storm rolled in that made me realize I might not be around for very long to worry about being tormented over memories of the rain. When I heard the first hint of thunder, I grabbed my noise-canceling headphones. I shut the curtains to block out any flashes of lightning and closed the windows to keep the smell of rain out. This method of drowning out the storms had worked until last night. As the rain and wind grew stronger outside, the power shut off. I now didn't have any way to avoid the sounds just outside my window. I got out of bed considering shoving toilet paper in my ears. I was desperate to not hear the roaring wind or the raindrops hitting hard against my window. As I started towards the bathroom, I stopped. For half a second, I thought I heard something else just outside. I could have sworn it was my name, but who would be calling out for me in this weather? It's not as if anyone called or texted me anymore. My phone still had battery left, and there weren't any messages of someone coming over. I figured it was just my anxiety acting up and making me hear things. I brushed off another whisper of my name coming from the rain, but I couldn't brush off someone knocking at my door. I jumped at the sound. For a full minute I didn't move, convinced they would just leave. I wasn't aware I held my breath until my chest started to hurt. Just as I took a slow inhale, the whispers started again. I gritted my teeth, the rage bubbling up. Was this a prank? Hadn't I already been through enough already? Who the hell was outside and thought all of this was funny? My feet hit the stairs hard. I rushed to the door, only pausing to pick up a baseball bat I kept near the shoe rack. I've had issues with people just not leaving me the hell alone, and I wanted some sort of weapon. Even though I was so pissed off, I still hesitated to open the door and face the rain. When I opened it, I saw no one on the front step. I still heard the whispers in the rain, sick garbled noises that had gotten worse since I opened the door. I braved a step outside, getting soaked within seconds by the cold downpour. My eyes scanned the lawn looking for any signs of the noises. The wind picked up, blowing the sound in different directions. I jumped again when the door behind me slammed shut. I cursed. My hands flew to the handle to find it locked. The spare key was kept under the mat. A bad spot, I know. It's not as if I owned anything to steal since the divorce, so I never bothered to move it. My hand landed on an empty spot. I lifted the mat to see nothing but dirt and a few skittering bugs where the key should be. Are you looking for this? The storm died down to a gentle mist after the voice spoke. The world beyond appeared to be a wall of white. I gripped the bat, ready to defend myself, but my heart dipped when I saw who sat on the old wicker chair on the other end of the porch. I must be losing it. You can't be here, I said, my body ice cold from the sight before me. A woman sat, her face drained of any color, her makeup not matching to her skin tone, her long dress a deep black with dried flower petals clinging to the fabric. I stared at her face, and at what her makeup didn't fully cover. A long sewn-together gash had split her head in two at one point. I'd heard she had an open casket funeral. After seeing her get pulled from her car that day, I didn't think that would be possible. If it's a mental breakdown, then you have nothing to lose talking to me. I'll give you back this if you do." She raised a pale hand to show the spare key dangling from one of her fingers. "I have nothing to say to you," I spat out. My stomach felt as if acid had pooled in the bottom. I started off the front steps and into the misty world beyond. The instant I got on the front walkway, the storm came back. It raged so hard I nearly got blown off my feet, and those sounds came back. Metal against metal, glass breaking, cars failing to stop in time, and the screams. All of it became nearly deafening with the rain. I forced my head up, squinting through the water stinging my eyes. In the distance I saw 7 figures. I couldn't make them out fully because of the storm, but I knew in a heartbeat who they were. I flew back to my house, slamming into the front door desperate to get back inside. The storm stopped when I stepped back onto the porch. I dripped rainwater as my fists pounded on the door, wanting nothing more than to get away from all of this. I soon exhausted myself, my entire body trembling from cold and fear. "Do you want to talk now?" I looked over, seeing that she hadn't moved. I slumped against the door, mentally beaten. The last thing I wanted to do was talk with her. She took my silence as a signal to keep speaking. "Was there something wrong with your car?" she asked, dead eyes landing on my own. For a second, I considered lying. Blaming my car might be a way out, but this also felt like a test, and I feared what would happen if I didn't tell the facts. "No," I half whispered. "There was nothing wrong with my car. That day, the brakes and tires were fine. Hell, I even had the oil changed 2 weeks before it all happened." "Checking your cell phone maybe?" she offered. I shook my head. I'd forgotten to plug my phone in that day, so it was dead on the ride home. Drunk maybe. You don't seem like much of a day drinker though. Your wife wasn't in the car either. Wasn't that the plot of a Stephen King book? A guy's wife was distracting him, and he ran someone over who?" I shot up, my face red with anger and fear. She was treating all of this like some sort of joke. So many emotions came up so violently. I thought I might be sick. It was raining. I just couldn't see. That's it. I've said this 100 times before, and everyone wants a different answer. I can't control the weather, and I couldn't see anything to pull over. I've already admitted I caused the accident, and it's taken everything from me. I snapped. In my rage, I saw the baseball bat I'd dropped and forgotten about. I picked it up, unsure of what I wanted to do with it. I either wanted to knock the smug grin off her face or break down my door. She didn't appear scared by my outburst or the weapon in my hand. She just laughed. I couldn't explain why the sound made me back away like I did. Such glee on a dead face appeared too damn unnatural. "You really said that to me? You said you lost everything to the person who died in the accident you caused?" "Really?" she said with humor still in her voice. I flinched at her words. My face was red and stomach twisting. "My wife, everyone, you don't understand." I started to weakly explain. "Oh, you poor baby," she replied, still amused. I kept my mouth shut, my lips drawn in a tight line, feeling as if I may burst. I was pregnant, you know, only a few weeks along, but it was there. I didn't have the best upbringing, so at first, I never wanted kids. I didn't think it was right to bring life into this world when it would be on fire in the next 10 years. But when I took the test, it just felt right, you know. I was finally getting somewhere. My life was all planned out. I was even 10 days away from retirement from the force. I listened to her, my legs shaking at first. Then I noticed the smirk on her face. A small flush of annoyance came over to me. "Are you joking with me?" She smiled. I bet when she was alive it would be an expression that brightened up a room. A little bit. Some of it was true. I didn't want to believe her. It was hard enough to accept 8 lives were lost that day. I couldn't handle the thought of another one on top of it all. She turned away from me, a new serious expression on her face. I followed her gaze out into the wall of mist. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the outlines of the 7 lurking out there, but something about them seemed off. The shape's just not human enough for it to be possible. It doesn't matter who I was or what I wanted to do. It ended because of the rain, she commented, sadness seeping into her tone for the first time. "Because of the rain," I confirmed, praying she believed me. Her dead eyes studied me for a long while. Then she tossed my space key at my feet. I didn't move to take it. I wondered if this had really happened, or if I really was having some sort of mental break. In the spring, it rained hard. A burst of it came down while I was on the highway. I wanted to pull over, but I saw nothing but water against my windshield no matter how hard my wipers worked. I saw the taillights too late. Then, all the noise happened at once. 8 people died, all because I hit one truck that rolled over. I have no idea why I lived when no one else in the other cars did. I stood as she got up from the chair. She slowly walked in my direction, pausing in front of me. I couldn't meet her eyes. I wanted a reason. I guess sometimes things just happen. She commented, voice still summer. What now? Are you going to move on or something? You're not going to haunt me for the rest of my life? I asked, still not raising my head to make eye contact. She laughed again. This time it sounded so cold it chilled me more than the rain. Her hand shot out and took hold of my wrist so hard I thought it may break. Her nails dug into my skin, causing blood to start seeping between her fingers. I looked up, finally seeing her eyes. I was too scared to even scream. I wanted a reason, and for you to suffer for the rest of your life. But I'm also a bit lazy. I don't need to do anything. I can forgive you and pass on knowing the other 7 won't. I looked behind her, the pain in my wrist fading. I choked on fear seeing the storm come back. In the rain were the 7 others that hated me. Their emotions twisted their bodies and souls into something no human should ever experience, let alone try to comprehend. All their eyes on me and all their hatred focused on one thing, to make my life as horrifying as possible. And when I couldn't take it anymore, they would take my soul into the never-ending storm. She let go of my wrist. By the time I realized she started to walk away, I reached back out for her. I wanted her to stay. I needed something normal to hold on to. For as strange as a talking dead woman may be, what waited beyond in the rain was much worse. She disappeared in the rain within seconds, and they came flooding in, their deformed hands tearing at my exposed skin and the sounds of the crash exploding around us. I envied her for having a quick death I knew I would not be so lucky to experience. My mind gave out in the freezing cold pain and the sounds of rain. When I woke up, I was in the front hallway of my house, soaking wet with cuts all over my arms. I stayed on the floor too hurt to move, but now too overwhelmed with fear over my future. I've considered moving somewhere it doesn't rain. Is there even a place like that? Even deserts get storms at some point. They'll always come back with the rain, the sounds of the hatred, and regret of death ringing out between raindrops. I could move, get far away from everything, but these cuts on my arms they left will heal to become scars. No matter what I do, they'll always be there, waiting for me in the rain.